Okay, good evening, everyone. Okay, so Brian's not here. Vice Chair Chris Brogan,
Present.
Secretary Marlene Batista,
I'm here.
Pamela Iacono,
I'm here.
and I know Jay Gross is not going to be here tonight. John Matola
I'm here.
and John Wynn.
Present.
Okay.
And Brian is here.
Oh, great.
Oh.
It's Brian.
Yeah, I was able to join. Thank you, Pro.
All right, thank you.
Hi, Pro.
Bye.
Okay, Brian, you're now in charge.
Okay. I didn't want to step on your torch or toes there, as the case may
No,
be.
it was thrilling for items number 1 and 2, but that's about as much as I can handle for today.
I was kind of hoping that you would be wrapping things up at this point. But I guess if we could go into the pledge on that note. Pledge allegiance
To the
the flag
United States of America,
United States of America,
to the
and to the republic
for
which it
one
stands,
nation,
one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty
and justice
for all.
All right, great. So then, moving right along, we are gonna go to the next agenda item, which I believe is action item number 3, correct? Is Steve on? Yeah.
I'm here.
Mhm.
Yeah. And that's where we're at, right? And Steve, you're gonna take us through this document that we've received this afternoon. Is that the plan?
Yep,
Okay.
that is the plan. So I'll walk through it and then we can, I'll explain what I did. Basically, what this document reflects is what occurred at the last meeting. And in broad terms, what we had agreed upon at what the commission had agreed upon at the last meeting, or there was consensus on at the last meeting, is that we go back to basically the structure of government that exists today, with various changes that I'll explain as I go through it. So essentially, the RTM remains a representative.
Can we get somebody to mute, please?
That the RTM remains a representative town meeting, that it does not become what some had considered to be a town council, and that it resume its place as it is in the charter today, as an independent town meeting and an outgrowth of the historic town meeting concept. That's why, as you will see as we go through the document, as I start to talk about the changes, when you go to 2.3, there's a minor change in 2.1. There's some language in there that really doesn't apply. It was new language I added, and I had some language in there that really didn't apply to Fairfield, so I deleted that language, which has to do with the fall of elections, which is dealt with later on in this section, in this article. But the first change you will see is in section 2.3. I took the RTM out as an elected town official. It is not included in the elected town officials. It's got its own special category of being an RTM. And what the language that I inserted with regard to the RTM, and you can correct it as you'd like, is that there shall be up to 30 members of the RTM unless otherwise modified by the RTM as set forth below. Right now they have the ability to establish the number of members and the number of districts. And so we are in this at this portion silent on the number of districts, because that ultimately is an RTM decision. The next change in the document, it's not really a change.
Excuse the interruption. Can I just ask a process question? Are we going through the whole thing and then going back, or are we?
I'd like to go through the whole thing.
How do you want to handle it? Okay.
Yeah,
Yep.
I thought it'd be useful to go through the whole thing. It won't take that long. And then I'll kind of earmark note issues that I think the next issue is an earmark issue. This is the 2.4.
And it's Steve, well, Pam interrupted, I forgot to mention at the beginning of this that Brenda Kupchik, our first select woman, has asked to join us today. So she's gonna join on 5 o'clock to discuss her thoughts on the streamlined budgeting process. So with everyone's indulgence, I hope that is okay. With you all, because as we're heading in this direction, thought it might be helpful to have her come join. So if we could pause where we're at when she does join, that would be great and appreciated.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just noticed a question that came up from the audience about who decided on the 30. And I don't think there's a final decision, but I think that the instruction to me was that we look at a 30-member RTM. And as a 30-member max RTM, because the reality is that we're retaining the ability and power of the RTM to modify the number of members within that body. 2.4, this is something that needs to be discussed, that I know a couple of the commissioners have raised questions about, and that is the cycle of the election cycle, where there are 5 candidates for Board of Ed. There's language in here that's been in here for a while that we haven't discussed. We should probably discuss that at some point today. That is in section 2.4C. The next changes, I'm looking through the documents to see where they are made, come in section 2.7. I've put back into the document composition and election of the Board of Select Persons and the first select person. This is no new language. It is, except for the modification of the titles, selectmen in both cases. But sections A through E are all in the current charter. They were taken out of my original draft because we were looking at eliminating the Board of Select Persons. All the other sections here are not changed at all until we get to the RTM. The RTM section, the legislative power provision is current language in the document. Section 3.2 is a rearrangement, but everything in this section is in the current document except one new section, as you will see, in section 3.2 A1B. The second sentence has that the district representation shall be subject to the provisions of the general statutes pertaining to minority party representation. So while we modified the number of districts, we had a specific number of districts, a specific number of members of the RTM, and the proposal before you at the last meeting subjected to that to minority party representation, while we were leaving the number of districts up to the RTM. I was under the impression, and I placed in this document, the notion that you wanted to have district representation within the district system, minority party representation within the district system. So that is new language in 3.2 A1B. And again, I'll just remind the public, any members of the public who are reading along with us, that if you look at the documents, you will see where these sections came from in the prior, the current version of the charter. Reapportionment is still yellowed in subsection 2. The current language is there. And I think the intent, I thought there was some intent on the part of the commission to have a discussion about how reapportionment should be conducted. And that's why I put that section in yellow. If you're looking at a red line version, you see some sections that were eliminated. If there's sections that have a reference to recodification, they are probably placed into that major section in 3.2. But I've not eliminated any current powers or language from the current sections on RTM. In 3.4, there's a typo I noticed in 3.4, 3.4E. There's an extra E in there. All the language I added when we were moving the RTM toward a legislative model, some of it's been eliminated, but all of the current authority that they have is and remains in the document. The details about the committee structure have been taken out. The RTM operates like a more well-defined town meeting. So I thought that if that's the direction they wanted to go in, they should continue to move forward with the rules that they currently have. One new section I put in here, number 94, is a provision on public hearing notice. I thought that would be a useful, since we're addressing the issue of notice, it would be a useful issue to have in the charter. It's the kind of thing you want to have in a charter so that everybody is complying with the concept of notice. The definitions of hearing and meeting notice and public notice and publication, which you'll find just before section 3.5, remain here, because those are going to be defined terms that will be at the beginning of the document, but they have special pertinence to the legislative process. Before we get to the section on overrule, which is the referendum, you will note that I did not include in here the section on general powers. A number of those general powers were powers that were placed here because they were replacing some elements. They were replacing the Board of Selectmen, and so some of the issues that were delineated, including the role and responsibility for various appointments to boards and commissions, goes away, since the Board of Selectmen is in here, and they're going to retain their current authority with respect to appointments to boards and commissions. Trying to see if there's anything else new here. There's a new section 3.5A, or B rather, which again addresses the issue of publication and posting of adopted legislation, which I think is useful because it comes right before the petition for overrule, and I think it clarifies when legislation is subject to the potential for overrule. So that section is cleaned up. 3.6 is the current referendum language. We put it in this section because that's a logical place for it to be. Now keep in mind that because it's an RTM system, there's no first select woman's veto. So the only veto for legislation or budgets is the referendum. And that's why I thought the placement of the referendum after the legislative process is completed was a logical place to place the referendum authority. We then move into the Article 4. Again, there should be not much new here. I've reinstated, although I think I did, yeah, I reinstated the Board of Select Persons. You'll see their general powers in section 4.2. There is nothing new in there, I think. Oh, except for subsection C, which addresses the issue of items 1 through 3 of contracts that are in excess of a certain amount of money, contracts that are multi-year. This was a provision that was placed in the legislative body, and some of this stuff will go to the RTM if you're dealing with multi-year contracts. They are the legislative body and they have the authority for that. So that section is missing from the RTM section, but because contracts are a function of the Board of Selectmen, select persons, I thought that section should be in the section dealing with contracts as is in the current charter. This is a new one, and so this section is something that you should pay a little attention to. B1C. The definition of contracts, which is in the current document, I will pull out and put into the definition section. Everything else here is, if you're looking at a red line, it looks like it's new, but everything else here is just simply reinstated in the section on the Board of Selectmen. I don't think there's anything else new in the Board of Select Persons responsibilities. The same is true in 4.3, where I've gone through with the board, the first select person's authority. I think there is a new paragraph in here. I think I added words direct and supervise the administration of the departments, which is current responsibility. The direct and supervise is an executive function that I've placed in many charters with regard to the executive authority of the chief executive elected official of the community. 135, footnote number 135, is again the same. It's regarding that the first selectman is responsible for the administration of the affairs of the town with respect to the departments of the town. The delineation of responsibilities, in addition to that, are as they are in the current charter with a couple of exceptions, 141. And I left this in here because there was a note that Commissioner Wynn had commented on this section. And, you know, if we don't think it's necessary to put in here, I only put it in because I did not want to eliminate a comment by one of our commissioners. It's the authority to investigate the availability of state and federal funds and grants, which you would think a chief executive would be doing, and advise the town's departments and boards and commissions with respect to obtaining such funds and grants, and periodically reporting to the RTM and Board of Finance. So that is a new provision. I left it in there. It's not new from the last draft to this draft. I retained it from the last draft, mainly because there was a comment from Commissioner Wynn. If it's not something that you think is vital or crucial to mention here, we can do it. The same is true of item number 8. This was a Scrivener's choice, me. This is MIRA. This is collective bargaining. This is governed by state law. And I thought it was useful to delineate it because the first select woman person is responsible for collective bargaining. And I think it's something that the voters, the general public needs to be conscious of. It would not otherwise be mentioned necessarily in the charter, And so I made a judgment call to leave that new provision in the document as well. The other one, 150. There is a new section that I left in the document regarding the mediation and resolution of differences. That it's the first select person's responsibility to be responsible for the mediation and resolution of differences between boards, commissions, committees, agencies, authorities, and other public bodies within the town government relating to an interpretation of town policies and procedures. This was placed in here. I think I recommended the language mainly because of the structure and form of government you have, and you have a number of elected bodies in the community. The chief executive is put at a significant disadvantage if people can say, well, we're independent, planning and zoning is independent. Now you can't go in there and intrude on their regulatory function, but if there's a policy issue that interfaces with other departments, with other commissions, I thought it was a perfectly reasonable authority to lay out clearly for the chief executive officer of the community. Remember, we were having an issue in subsection D. We don't have that issue any longer on the designation of who was going to be the acting first select person if we had an RTM. That was a different structure. That language is now the same. The staff language is 52 is the same, although I think it's the same language that we had, and there is language in the current charter. Subsection F is something that's still subject to debate, and I left in, this is the chief administrative officer or town administrator. We have to decide what we're going to call it, and there was language here that was recommended, I believe, by Vice Chair Brogan. I left the alternate language in the document as well. The next section is that we probably should talk about. I think that the town attorney will have some comments on this section. He has raised it before, and I asked him to raise it again this evening, is section 4.5 on official bonds. Apparently, we haven't had official bonds in some period of time following consultation with our insurer, and the question is whether it doesn't make any sense to, whether it makes any sense to continue to have it in this document. So that is an issue that should be addressed when we go back through the document. On the elected offices, not much has changed. Nothing has changed there, I don't believe. Nope. And then you get to elected boards and commissions. Again, I don't think that there were any substantive changes from the last draft. So I got you through the document. It doesn't mean it's done. It's just I wanted to let you know what was in there and why it isn't in there. And I'll be happy to answer any questions, or you can now proceed through the document on your own pace.
Are there questions for Steve? John Matola, jeez.
It's all right. Jim's my brother, so that's okay.
He's a good guy.
Thank you. So just a few things. I know at the last meeting we discussed going in a certain direction for the RTM, that we wanted to keep that form of government and keep the Board of Selectmen. Maybe it's me. I mean, personally, I was willing to reduce the number of the RTM to 30 members if we were going to eliminate the Board of Selectmen. But then we had a discussion at the last meeting that, and Steve mentioned this, that if you went that route, maybe 30 was too high, and then we had the further discussion. I don't want to regurgitate it, but the fact that we're keeping the RTM and the Board of Selectmen now, I guess my concern is, why would we in this document reduce the number of RTM members down to 30 when that's really has been traditionally the prerogative of the representative town meeting. And so I guess what I would throw out there is, you know, right now the charter says no more than 56 members. The current composite of the RTM is 40. I think we should have language in there that, you know, the representative town meeting should have no more than 40 members. That's what we currently have, and leave it to that body to regulate that themselves, like they've done for, you know, 60 years at least. So that's one thing I wanted to throw out there. And then since we're talking about the RTM, Steve, is on page 15, which is section 3.2 membership, subsection B, is that the section you're talking, is that the minority representation?
Yes, the second sentence is that.
Okay. All right. And
The first section is in the current charter, is the first sentence of Article 2, Section 2, I think. And the second sentence is the one, so that says that the RTM gets to choose the number of districts by ordinance, which is the current language, which is the current way it's done. The second sentence says when they do that, they need to employ a stricter standard than the state standard, because the state does not require minority party representation in a district system. That Fairfield would have a stricter system and allow for minority party representation in their districts, which is permitted. It's a stricter standard than the state standard.
all right, so we don't have to do that, right?
No, it says shall be subject to. So I would argue.
Yeah, but my question is, if we have, just for argument's sake, we have 10 districts, 3 members per district, does this then require a 2-1 makeup for minority representation?
If you have that sentence in it, I would argue that it does, yes.
It does, yeah, but my point, we don't have to have that sentence in here. If we
you don't want
choose,
minority party representation, you don't need to have it in here. If
Let
you
me just,
Right.
if I could maybe clear this up, I'm sorry to interrupt, but John, so you are correct. There was a lot of discussion last time. The way we left it is we gave Steve a lot of direction. My understanding was, and someone else can chime in afterwards, was that we put the Board of Selectmen back in. We decided to move forward with a 10-30 RTM, and that we were going to pick up the discussion about minority representation. So that's kind of where I came into today thinking. So just because, so it's in here, you are correct. It's only in here for discussion. It's not in here because we all agreed on minority representation.
that's fine. I just want to make sure that that's the case, because, you know, all right, when we discuss that in more detail, I'll talk about that. I'll stop right now. So thank you.
Any other questions for Steve? And then we'll just start back at the top. All right. I think that makes most sense. Is that, you know, you gave the overview, Steve, but now we're going to go back to the beginning of document action item number 3. So the first, are we stopping then at the highlighted sections? Is that where you?
No, I would say that there's really not, I mean, unless you are unhappy with the language I deleted in 2.1, which was not Fairfield language, it was language I've used in other charters. And as I was looking at it, I said, why is that in here? I would say that the first section you should look at, well, unless you want to stop, unless you want to discuss, let's see, are the constables here, or are they down a little further? The constables are a little further down. So unless you want to discuss, I mean, I'd say the first issue is ironically the issue that John, the Commissioner Mato, oh, the constables are in 2.3A11. So I don't know if you want to discuss that is an outstanding issue. I know that the town attorney has raised issues about it. If you want to discuss that, you want to go in the order of things that are unresolved, that's an unresolved issue.
Okay. All right, let's discuss that. I know that we've visited this issue on several occasions. I've looked at it again. I think that one of the proposals was to have the first select person appoint 2 from each party, so total of 4 constables. That's kind of where I'm at this point, but opening up to discussion. Anyone, Pam?
I'm supportive of that, moving to an appointed position. 2 people from each party is perfectly acceptable to me.
Vice Chairman Brogan had his hand up, then Eileen, then John Wynn.
Yeah, I agree with the appointed. Maybe, I know there's a concern because there is financial remuneration with this. Maybe have the Board of Selectmen be the appointing agency, so it's a little bit more public. That would be my only suggestion.
Okay, fine with me.
I agree.
Marlene?
I agree.
Okay. And
Yep.
then,
I like Chris's suggestion.
all right, and John Wynn was next, unless,
I was just agreeing with the
Okay.
discussion that was taking place.
and then John Matola.
Yeah, I'm okay with that, given some guidance we've received from probate court. That's fine.
Okay, so it's 4, 2 from each party, appointed by the Board of Selectmen.
All right, let's keep going like this, guys. This is great. A good omen. So the next issue is in, if you don't mind, I'll walk through this and miss
One
something.
moment, Steve. Chris Brogan.
Yeah.
I want to raise it. I don't know if this is a big issue or not. We're going to talk about it later. 9 members of the Board of Finance. Somebody has suggested, and I'm not sure who or how often, that perhaps that number should be 7. I don't think I know enough about it to have a lot of say one way or the other, but I don't know if others feel that's an issue we should discuss or not.
We can certainly discuss it. Okay, anybody else want to discuss moving it to 7? I mean, I think we've talked about it in the past. I didn't personally hear any compelling reason to reduce it. And I believe that John Matola, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but him being on the Board of Finance, I think he said that there was not a compelling argument to do so. Am I getting that correct, more or less? So
yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so I think
I'm good with that. I just wanted to make sure we've taken care of it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Excellent. So I guess the next issue, I don't know if the first select woman is here. It's now 5 o'clock. She's not. I'll move you to the next issue, which is section 2.3B, the RTM. And the way it reads here is there shall be up to 30 members of the RTM unless otherwise modified by the RTM as set forth in the section that deals with the RTM. And I think that means the max would be 30. They can't go beyond the 30. Or if it was 40, they couldn't go beyond the 40 as they can't right now go beyond the 56. So the notion is they can do whatever they want up to the amount that would be set here. So that's your next dilemma.
okay. So John Matola, now we're here.
Yeah, I would change that to 40 members. That's the current makeup today. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to repeat myself. I right now the charter has 56. I think we reduce it to up to 40 members and let the RTM decide the size of its membership. That's where we are right now. I think this is a pretty good document as we're going through it, and I would hate to see something like reducing the RTM blow this whole thing up. So my recommendation would be there shall be up to 40 members of the representative town meeting, and then allow the RTM to, as it has traditionally done over its history, debate its size during the appropriate time periods. They usually do that during redistricting. So that would be my recommendation.
Okay. If I see the our first selectwoman's joined, so does anyone have an objection to tabling this until we get to the budget? Because I think this is gonna be a bit of a discussion. It sounds that way. Are you okay with that, John?
Yeah, I'm okay with it.
Pam, you had your hand up. Is that okay with you?
Yes, no problem. We can break for the first selectwoman.
Okay. Well, as I mentioned, Brenda was going to join to discuss the concept about streamlining the budget process that we had discussed kind of when we made some more, concrete decisions on the form of governance at our last meeting. And so thank you for joining us. And so hopefully we can get some more clarity and you can give some direction as to what you're thinking. And we can make those, so consider that and make some decisions today. So thanks again, Brenda.
Thank you. I didn't actually have a chance to read what Attorney Mednick may have given to you yet. I've been literally jumping from one thing to the next all day. And our governor was here today, which was nice. We had met at Bigelow Tea, so that was nice. Nice break. So anyway, I know that you're looking at a proposal to streamline our budget process to make it a bit more efficient. I don't think it's probably a surprise to anyone that I have mentioned numerous times since I assumed this role that our process, I feel, is very repetitive. It is. I don't feel it. It is. It is repetitive. And it's long. And sluggish. And I think that it would be more efficient for not just elected officials, all elected officials that are involved in the budget process, but also for the public to follow our budget process. It is like trying to watch the bouncing ball at this point, the way it is, where the first select person, works on developing a budget with department heads, presents the budget, full presentation, PowerPoint to the Board of Selectmen, lines up all the department heads, and the Board of Ed comes in and does, and then there's motions and deliberations and votes. And then the process starts back again. Per select person does a full presentation to the Board of Finance, all the department heads, every single thing. And this process moves on. And then we go through the whole thing again at the RTM level. To me, it just makes so much more sense to have joint hearings, to have this first select person, because I'm not going to be here forever, and this charter is going to set the stage for our future. And you'll probably have a higher propensity of attracting someone who's interested of some caliber to do this job if they could do it more efficiently. And so holding joint hearings is what I think would be appropriate. I think the budget process should start in March because we're always having to update numbers, insurance numbers, this number, that number, because we don't have all the right numbers. And it would be, to me, beneficial to all the elected officials to be together in a collaborative way, to have the first select person present the budget to all three bodies, Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, RTM, in, say, an auditorium style setting. And over a period of time, the same way they would do with each of these bodies, just all together. And I just feel like each elected official would benefit from that, because let's face it, I know that each, the board, once the Board of Selectmen finishes with the budget, they're done. They aren't paying attention, right? Or for the most part, they're not. Once the Board of Finance, they're gone, then they're not, so you have a lot of repetitive questions, the same questions that get asked throughout this long process. And you have department heads having to do presentation after presentation after presentation. So to me, it makes sense that all of the voting bodies be together, collaborating, listening to one another, asking questions that helps maybe answer some of theirs. And then the public can watch this process that is more streamlined and condensed together. Then I imagine after those joint hearings go for, then the Board of Selectmen convenes, They can have follow-up, they can request follow-up discussions with any department they have additional questions for, and then they can deliberate and make motions and vote. Then they can send it to the Board of Finance, where they can do the same thing. They can have follow-up from department heads that they have additional questions. They'll have where the Board of Finance has meetings that the other bodies don't, where they'll have just finance meetings to have lots of discussion about finance and this and pension. They'll ask all of those questions. They could still have those, but they won't have that budget presentation. They could still do the follow-up and their regular meetings, make their deliberations, vote, and then send it to the RTM, where the RTM can do the very same thing. Have their follow-up with department heads that they have specific questions on, and their deliberations, and then vote. I just think it would be just so much more efficient, and it just makes sense to me to have a more collaborative process for all of our elected officials who cast votes on the budget. And it would be really helpful for the numerous department heads that, you know, are running departments in our town that service over 60,000 people. And, you know, to have to do that over and over again, it doesn't really like make a whole lot of sense to me. And obviously to the public, who can then just watch the hearings and see all their elected officials engaging and collaborating and asking questions and hearing the answers from the department heads throughout that joint budget process. So that's just where I sort of lay down obviously I'm in a unique position because I have to do all of those meetings, whereas no one else does. Of course, our department heads. So that's my 2 cents and my opinion on our process and what I think would be beneficial for a change to how we operate.
I was muted there. That's helpful. Does anyone have questions for the first selectwoman? So we've got Steve, we have a document here, action item number 1, and that is embodying more or less what Brenda just went over.
Action item number 1 is a document that you guys passed back the beginning of the year. There were still some open questions, and in light of the further discussions we've had, I believe the first select person has raised issues. They're not reflected in that document. That document currently reflects where you are, and I think the intent this evening was to listen to the first select person and get her views and have a discussion and modify action item number 1 this evening. I think that's the intent, is to go through that document, and we have some new testimony, although it's not entirely new. I think she raised this question back in November. I could be wrong. I think she did raise the idea of kind of a uniform or unitary presentation. It's really the budget workshop. Rather than calling it a hearing, it's really the workshop where the entities would meet with all of the department heads. And may I just ask a question? I don't think, if I may, Madam First Select Woman, that you're not talking about one night, because these workshops could probably go on for multiple nights.
No, absolutely. Yeah. So right. my process is that it should follow the same structure that it follows now. So you have whatever 6 or 8 departments, depending. You know, you try to organize it so the bigger departments aren't put in with other big departments, so it's not really long, and that people get to ask all the questions that they want. But over a period, 3 to 4. Whatever, same process as you would for each of those bodies, but now all together.
Yeah, I just wanted that
clear.
Suggest
Board of Ed should be 2 nights, you know, to have more in-depth discussions, because their budget is so big.
Okay, thank you.
So let me I know I've lost you here somewhere, actually. Oh, there you If I could just clarify, so you talk about these number of hearings that will happen all together. It would be the Board of Selectmen, the Board of Finance, and the RTM all together. But when after they get it, then they would go back to their respective deliberations, and then do the business that they kind of normally do and vote on it individually as their own body. Correct?
Correct.
And if they had questions, could they then call, under what you're outlining here, like have follow-up meetings with department heads or?
Absolutely, just like they do now, right?
Okay.
So each body has the full presentation, like I do my whole PowerPoint, and then whatever, you have 6 or 10 departments, depending. They come, they do their whole budget presentation, questions and answers, and then each of the bodies will ask for another, for whatever specific. Typically, it's bigger departments. Like I know the police had to come back on because we were adding 2 people, and then there was issues that they wanted to. Each of the bodies had questions about, say, overtime or things of that nature. Simply saying we want some follow-up with these departments. Each body could do that, obviously, under their own purview. It just makes sense to have, in my opinion, the full process done together.
Now, okay, John Matola has a question, it appears.
So I'm not sure how efficient that would be. If you have multiple meetings with, you're talking about having up to 39 elected officials at a meeting, hearing a presentation from a particular department head with possibly, many elected officials asking questions that night. I think if you want to try to get some efficiencies, maybe the thing we look at is look at what the Board of Selectmen's role in the budget is. It seems to me a lot more advisory than the other bodies, and maybe the thing to look at is to combine, like we've done this in the past, is to combine the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance meetings during the budgetary process. That way, that would limit the department heads and various departments from coming on 2 occasions. They could come only on 1 occasion, and then they would do their thing with the RTM. I think having, up to 39, 40 elected officials in one room hearing a presentation and then asking questions, and then you just said it, Brenda, that the Board of Finance or the RTM then could call back these people. That could make them actually do more work, in my opinion. So that's the concern I have about doing it in that going in that direction. I think our focus should be more maybe in some way combining the Board of Finance and Board of Selectmen budget meetings to make it a little more efficient that way. So those are my initial thoughts.
No, I hear you, John. I think, though, really realistically, what you're looking at is you have a 40-member RTM, and I know your guys are looking at condensing it down to maybe 30. But you're really only looking at adding 9 Board of Finance members and 2 Board of Selectmen members to a process. Because if you do combine the Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance together, you still have to do this whole process over again. And honestly, it's hard for the public to follow. And I think, listen, I've been engaged. I've been an elected official in this town for 20 years. Honestly, you don't see every RTM member asking a ton of questions, but I think the benefit from the RTM to listen to other elected officials, everybody engaging together in a process, to me is it's beneficial to hear, and even for the Board of Finance to hear some questions maybe from RTM members. You're learning from each other because we're all in this together, right? We're all passing a budget for our community. I just think it's more collaborative and it's streamlined. And if you do reduce the body to 30, then you have, you have 10 less, so you have 30 plus your 9 plus your 2 Board of Selectmen members. The Board of the first select person is the person who creates the budget. They're the one that's presenting it. So I don't know. I just think I hear what your point is, but again, I think it's just, you're only taking off one step if you combine the Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance. And I've heard over the years, and even as when I was an RTM member, you kind of feel like you're the last rung. You're cut by the time it gets to you, you really hasn't been sort of engaged in that process. And, I know people have their sort of like, our board is, has to do it this way, but I feel like everybody is a stakeholder. Every elected official that votes on the budget is a stakeholder in the process. And I like the idea of doing it together. I think it's beneficial to people as a whole, but
I just respectfully think it would dilute the process. The budget process is the most important thing we do in this town. It's a deliberative process, and it's purposely a deliberative process, and it does take some time. I just don't think it's a good idea. I don't think it's good for the citizens and the taxpayers. It is a methodical, deliberative process that works. And again, I am all for looking at ways to combine a Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance meetings on the budget. We've done that in the past. I understand that. But to have 1, 2 or 3 big massive meetings with 39 to 40 elected officials there asking questions, I don't think that's the right way to go, respectfully. So,
can I ask you though a question? How do you feel it dilutes it? In what way?
Because during the process, we learn things. There's thoughtful questions. RTM members listen to the Board of Finance meetings, the Board of Selectmen meetings. Board of Finance meetings, Board of Finance members will listen to the Board of Selectmen meeting. It's a process that has steps. We learn things as we go, and we learn from each other as the process moves forward. And that's important. That's how we end up with really good budgets. You guys do a great job with the budget process too. I'm not being critical. The process enables us to come up with very good budgets that benefit the taxpayers. And to do it in I'm going to use wrong terminology, but to shortcut it, I think is not a good thing to do, respectfully. And I appreciate that department heads have a lot of work to do, but if we can do something where we combine Board of Finance and Board of Selectmen meetings, they come to one meeting when their night's up, and then they have to go to an RTM meeting when they're considering the budget. I don't think that's asking too much of our department heads. So, I just don't think it would be an effective way to do it the way you've suggested. But I'm open ears about, again, the Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance having combined meetings during the budget process. So,
well, John, I hear what you're saying to a certain extent, but what you're saying is that, you're requiring RTM members to sit on FairTV and listen to Board of Selectmen and then go to Board of Finance and listen to those. Your argument's not holding up, because if we could all, and I'm not saying cram these meetings into short, condensed, I'm saying the same process, all together. And to me, saying, oh, RTM members, you should listen to all these meetings, or Board of Finance, you should listen to all the Board of Selectmen meetings. I mean, why can't we just do it together? It's still deliberative. We're still all hearing each other's questions, but in a collaborative way. And it's, I think, a beneficial thing. I think there's this sort of protectionism of boards and stuff. And I feel like the RTM kind of gets the short end. Like they're not important. Like we don't even want to have them part of the meetings. And I think they should be. I think we should all be collaborative. And again, the public, I mean, think about it. There's hundreds of hours of budget meetings. And frankly, I mean, the changes that were made you know, they're never these big sweeping changes. To have the public have that ability to see the budget process in, you know, sort of one-stop shopping, it doesn't shortchange it. We're looking at shaving maybe a week off the budget process, but just having the ability to have joint hearings. Each body brings back whoever they want, and has their process and their deliberated process. I think is a modernization. It's an efficiency, and it's just more productive for everyone involved.
Well, I disagree with you respectfully, and I don't have any more to say about it right now, so thank you.
Thank Brian asked me to take over. He had to go off for a important call. Does anybody else have any comment? Attorney Mednick?
Yeah, I have one question on this issue of the three bodies. Normally in a legislative body, you have committees. How does the RTM, and this is for my edification, when you have the three workshops, I'm calling them workshops, you're calling them hearings, when you meet with department heads. When the RTM now currently meets at their phase with the department heads, is it the entire RTM or is it the finance or budget committee of the RTM? Because is there an answer? Is it the full RTM or is it a
Full
The full
RTM.
RTM.
All right. And is that tradition or is that by virtue of the rules of the RTM? Because there's no committee process?
Pam, you're on mute.
Can't hear you.
Sorry, I double muted myself. It's because there's no committee process.
Because one of the questions
We hear it over 2 nights, all of us.
Because one of the,
And it is redundant.
yeah, one of the things I wanted to raise in other communities, if you have a committee structure in your legislative body, perhaps that committee would be part of the tripartite meeting. Any member of the RTM can show up there, but if you have all 40 members or 30 members or 56 members participating in a budget workshop, it could be, that alone could be a very long process. Does it make any sense? I've raised this for John Matola's purposes. Does it make sense to define in the charter a finance function, a finance committee function, and have the finance committee of the RTM serve and meet as part of this tripartite session? And when it comes to the RTM, if the entire RTM wants to, as the first select woman has said, every body is still going to retain its jurisdiction to invite back department heads they believe should be there, come back there. I suppose it means if they wanted to invite them all back, which would be undermining the purpose of this, they could do that if they want to do that. But would it make sense to, in the charter, if you want to streamline it, have the committee, the finance or budget committee, whatever committee of jurisdiction, have them participate in that tripartite workshop? I just wanted to raise the question. I was trying to figure out how they did it and whether there was a better way to make it work.
Yep. Tam, go ahead.
In theory, that would make a lot of sense, but traditionally, the RTM as a whole does not respect the functions of the committees. They'll haul everybody back. That's the way, they just don't respect the committees. Even if you give them that authority, they won't do it. They'll call them all back. Yes, you are 100% correct, and we've sort of had this conversation about the committees. But, you know, traditionally, every single person on the RTM has to be involved in every single item that is on the agenda. They have to vote on every single item, even if it's not in their purview, and they make a big giant issue of it. They can't let it go. They don't function under those committees. If there's a way to make them work under the committee structure and respect the committee structure the way that other municipalities do that, then yeah, you definitely run more efficiently, effectively, and you delve deeper into it, but you have to respect what comes out of that committee from your colleagues, and it just doesn't happen.
I want to see what, yeah.
I like that. We have been hearing from the first select woman on joint things, like we did a joint paving, we did joint something else, I can't remember what it was. Fill pile, which was incredibly helpful to all be together in the same room, hearing everything, hearing each other's questions. I completely understand being on a 9-member board why you wouldn't want 30 people joining you in a discussion. I understand that, but there is something to be said about having the meeting where we're all hearing everything at once. And it would make sense to me that you're hearing it all at once, you're asking the questions over a 5-day period, a 10-day period, whatever that period is, to get through all of those things. And then the objective would be, in my opinion, to only call back the departments that you want to do a deeper dive on, which I think that's the way it should be now anyway. I had to sit through 2 nights of budget hearings, at the RTM that were condensed and rushed, and, we do a decent job of getting rid of the budgets, not calling back people who are flat or we don't have questions on, but even then we run out of time. And it would be so much more beneficial if everyone did follow what I call the bouncing ball. Each caucus is told, watch the Board of Selectmen, watch the Board of Finance, don't repeat yourself. But it doesn't happen. There's what should happen, and then there is what happens. So I don't know. I'm open to this conversation. It does make sense to me, but I understand. You're on a 9-member board. You don't want to be there with 30 other people. I get it, but it makes sense to me that we all hear it. It's the same reason why the RTM combined to hear it all together, so we heard each other's questions. Something has to give in all of this, because there is a tremendous amount of repetitiveness, and that doesn't stop the Board of Finance from calling back a department that they don't, that they want more information on. They have a question for the Parks and Rec director, they call him back. But then they don't need to call back the tax collector whose budget was flat. And same with the RTM. The Board of Finance takes action on an item, that with the Human Resources Department. Well, now the RTM wants to bring the Human Resources Department in because the Board of Finance took some type of action. There's a logical progression to that, in my opinion, based on what we have.
I had to step away, and I thank the vice chair very much for his leadership. I'm going to let you continue because I don't know who was called. I don't know where we are. So
we heard from John and Pam had comments and some discussion with the first select woman.
Okay.
So I'm not sure where we're proceeding from here right now, actually. Whether they're going to discuss it now or just come back to it.
Were there more points of conversation to be? Marlene? Oh, sorry. Then John Wayne.
Yeah, so I don't sit on Board of Finance and I don't sit on the RTM. But I think from a resident perspective, from a town person, just a lay person, I think the process is very long for our residents to watch it. We've had to watch a lot of it, obviously, because it's mostly virtual, which is another subject for another day. But I do think it's very long. I think there was a lot of repetitiveness. I even heard Mr. Mottola say at one of the Board of Finance meetings that they started to go very long, and I don't think that's respectful of the voters, quite honestly. I think it's a lot to follow, and it starts off like Board of Selectmen, everybody's gung ho. By the time it gets to the RTM, you can see everybody's sort of waned, and the, you know, with all due respect, some of the questions are not of great caliber. So I do think there's room for improvement there. But again, I don't sit on either of those boards, and I understand that there is a process. I do understand, you know, there is a need to. I do agree with Mr. Mottola that there's some good things that come out of these smaller groups. We do learn things as we go along, but there can be some consolidation of it, because it's a very, very long process from a public perspective. And I think that's important to consider.
Me too. John Wynn had his hand up, and then John Mottola.
Forgive me if we've covered this already, but why are we in this quandary right now with this problem? How did we get to the budget process, having the multiple steps, having it defined in our charter? Is this something that we should just put the responsibility for budgeting, the budgeting process, and the responsibility of the chief executive of the town, and allow them to define what they would like for the budget process and work through that, and have the boards and commissions and town department heads function in that fashion? Because what we're basically doing is, I don't know how we got to the point we're at, but we're now in handcuffs over how to make the process more efficient. Why don't we just vest that responsibility with our chief executive and allow them to manage how it's conducted? And if it doesn't work well, then we'll change it again at a point in the future. But let's try it that way right now. And here's a radical idea. If the RTM is part of the problem and that the size is too big, how about we streamline the RTM so that's not a big part of the problem on a recurring basis?
John Mottola. John?
So a couple of things. One is, if you have a meeting as suggested, our Board of Finance budget meetings can go to midnight. And you're talking about adding another 30 people. That's not efficient. It's going to go on forever, first of all. Secondly, I got to tell you all, the budget process is a lot of work. I understand it's a lot of work, but that's the way it's supposed to be. I haven't heard complaints about our budget process until really recently, all due respect. That's government. It is supposed to work this way. We're not a business. We don't allow one person to say he or she wants to do it this way and that's it. Our charter has set up a process that covers the budget process. And it's set up this way as a check and balance to the executive branch. That's the way it works. And it is the most important thing we do all year. And if it takes 2 or 3 months to do it, then so be it. I think what we should do is look at maybe having combined Board of Finance and Board of Selectmen meetings. I would be agreeable to that. That would make it more efficient. But it would still keep the integrity of the process in place if we went in that direction. So, John, in answer to your question is, the process is set up pursuant to the charter. It's the way it's been for a while. There is a provision in the charter that says that the Board of Finance and the Board of Selectmen can tweak the process if they agree. And that's a way to perhaps make it more efficient. And maybe that's what we look at. Maybe the Board of Finance and the Board of Selectmen should have a combined meeting. We did that in the past, John, probably about 5 or 6 years ago, but a couple of Board of Finances under the last administration, they didn't want to do it that way anymore. And so our current first select woman is involved in a process where she has to make a presentation to the Board of Selectmen first, and that has to come to the Board of Finance. So I just think if we want to be more efficient, that's what we need to look at.
Can I ask you a question, John? Because I've never been on the Board of Finance. I served on the RTM one term.
Yeah.
I remember the budget process. It was the most important thing we did, but I quite frankly didn't find most of the RTM to be that engaged. And so I guess I think that from my perspective, which is limited and aged at this point, they would benefit from having kind of the hearing where the A-list finance people are there asking questions. And I know that they could come watch it, but if that's the opportunity and like the game in town of when the but hearing happens, it sounds to me that coupled with the fact that the public has a one-stop shop of, where to kind of tune in to see what's going on with their money. It makes some sense to me. It doesn't seem to me that what I'm hearing proposed would take any authority away from any of the boards, because they would then like retreat to their respective boards and huddle, deliberate, and go through their same process and come back and, make their decisions as they normally do. But it's just really I don't see what's so like fatal about having a combined hearing. I guess I'm just missing that point. Maybe you could help me understand that.
I'm not saying it's fatal. I'm saying it's going to be more inefficient because you're going to have 39 people at a meeting. No one's going to be able to ask all their questions. Then when the Board of Finance goes back to do its thing, they're just going to have everyone come back, some of those department heads, and ask all the questions again and get into the detail. We may have, the police department chief before us for an hour and a half on their budget on any given night, or a DPW person. You think you're going to be able to get through that with 39, 40 elected officials? The Board of Finance is just going to call those people back and ask them some more questions and get into the nitty gritty and get into the detailed analysis that we get into during the process. So I think it's going to make it even more inefficient if you go that route. So that's my concern.
Pam, you had your hand up, I thought, before, or no?
No, I'm good. You summarized my stuff. I didn't see how having a joint meeting messed with the integrity of the process.
Okay. Well, it certainly looks like we've got a lot to discuss on this. Any more questions for our first select woman while she's here? Well, thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thank you. And I do appreciate, I know this is a lot of work and you're looking at a whole lot of things. And I haven't been plugged into this, obviously. And I would just, try to share my perspective as the person, leading the town, who was elected to do that. I have a very different perspective, obviously. And I know there's, the sort of protectionism that happens in certain areas. People feel that, their board needs to have its own thing. And I think that the idea of joint hearings allows, to John's point, they ask, Board of Finance asks a lot of questions. You're right, they do. But in my opinion, I think they would still be able to do that. And then I think the benefit would be gained from the other elected officials being able to hear those questions being asked and answered. And I think that's a benefit to all the elected officials who vote on the budget. Running a town is not just, going to night meetings and presenting a budget. There's a lot else involved in it. And, I guess you could sort of look at it like government should be inefficient, and that's just how government is. I disagree. I think government can be more efficient and have checks and balances at the same time. I just think that people need to kind of look outside themselves. I know we've had a certain way of doing things for a very long time. And if anything I've said from the day I got sworn in was we shouldn't be doing what we always do. You know, sometimes we should do things differently. And, you know, sometimes you make a decision to do something differently. It may not always turn out the way you thought, and maybe you try something else. But I think we should always be trying to do new things. Our town's charter has been around for a really, really long time, and our town has changed in a dramatic way. And we have a big town. It's not a little town anymore. It's a big town. It's, you know, it's like Steve Mednick has said on numerous occasions, we're the, I don't know, 11th or 12th biggest town in this, in a state of 169 towns. And so what I'm saying is that, yes, the budget process is very important. I start working on the budget in October. I mean, we're working on the budget and dealing with budget from October to May. And there I'm just suggesting to people who the Charter Revision Commission, that a town administration should obviously work very hard on the budget process. But there's a whole lot of other things that need to be looked at and have focus on as well, so that our town is moving forward in a positive direction. So I just offer that up because I think at the end of the day, I think it would be very beneficial to have those. And I think our RTM would benefit from learning, and I think we can all learn from each other in this collaborative process. And so that's just my 2 cents. And I do want to say I appreciate your hard work. I hope we have some meaningful changes for our town after this process is over. Things that not are only good for people who are running our town or people who are serving our town, but also to the public who wants to understand what's happening in our town and be engaged in it in a meaningful way. So that's it. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Steve, did you have a question, or were you waving goodbye? Oh.
I was waving goodbye.
Oh, okay. Goodbye. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Brenda.
Thank you, everyone.
So, while this is top of mind, do we want to stay on the budgeting process and then kind of pick up the other? I think it kind of makes sense where it seems to, is there any objection to doing that? John, objecting or have a comment? Or both? Oh.
I'm not objecting. I don't like, and I'm not being critical. This is kind of sprung on us at the last minute. We're kind of near the end, and this is a huge issue if we're going to get into this. That's my concern. So, and I'm not quite sure what to do about it. So I just wanted to express that.
Fair enough. I think I do remember at the end of our last meeting that we had a very long conversation about the form of governance. And we have deliberated many, many different forms and areas where we could improve upon, town governance, recognizing the fact that it's a growing community, but also balancing that with the fact that, we're not going to change for change's sake. Most everything has been kind of rejected that we have discussed because, other models that may work seem to be, not, there's no appetite for it, which is fair enough. But this was where I thought we had all agreed to and gave Steve a direction of, here's where we're heading. And part of where we were heading was streamlining the budgeting process, which was mentioned last fall when we received comment on this by Brenda, maybe others. I can't say for certain right now. It makes sense to me. We have decided not to adopt any of the other forms of, making government a little more user-friendly to the town, a little more accountable, somewhat more efficient, without sacrificing any of the checks and balances. And so this is one of the, I really don't think it's being sprung upon the group here, but that's just kind of my take on it. I mean, maybe it's something how I perceived it last week or whenever we last met. To that end, I mean, I do think it's a worthwhile suggestion. I mean, to me, it makes sense. And I mean, I get that you have expertise on the Board of Finance and you know better than I do how they operate and how it may bear out, but I think it's an idea worth pursuing. Chris.
Yeah, I guess I'm in a similar position to you in that, I was on the RTM a long time ago and I'm no expert on this. I guess I'll give, as we did talk about having a more efficient process, and I'll give the first select woman the benefit of the doubt, and she's in charge of the process, to live through it. I don't see her proposal, and this may be lack of really understanding what goes on, as being all that radical, because because really it's just a matter of having these joint hearings. Each board will do what it wants to do, and I think, and perhaps as John predicts, that's exactly what will happen if they feel slighted or they didn't get a meaningful participation. So I think I look at this as a pretty modest experiment that kind of depends on the goodwill of everybody involved, which maybe is too much to ask for, I don't know. And could be just overwhelmed by the exception, which is that each board, of course, gets to drill down on particular items. So kind of agree with John Wynn in that it should be something. It'd be nice if somebody could experiment for a year or two, see how it goes, and then come back and trim it and all that. But the way the charter works, we can't do it that way. And unfortunately, I don't think we can force this type of experiment without putting it in a charter. So I think that's the only way we can do it. And then maybe some future committee will say, what were they thinking? I don't know. But I do think it makes sense. I think as Brian said, we have been talking about some efficiency in the process all along. Back when I was in the RTM, I kind of agree. By the time the department heads got to us, they were just, please let this be done with, which not in the sense of, I mean, they're willing to answer questions, but there was just a drawn out process. And of course, there's always, the more you talk about something, the more you're going to learn, but there is a point where it's enough, you need to move on. So I guess so in that sense, I'm supportive. I wish we could put in something to put some flexibility in the charter. Off my head, I can't think of that. So I think it's worth a try.
Okay. Anybody else agree it's worth a try? Or John Wynn, I don't want to put words in your mouth.
No, I agree that it's worth putting it in and trying to make the change. But just to respond to John Matola's points, he agrees, I believe, that the Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance combining that step would be beneficial. So I guess the real onus would be on the RTM to not have an inefficient participation in that joint meeting, and be, thoughtful, thorough, organized, and not have 40 people trying to attend a meeting and all ask a question. It may not make sense, but so they could be more structured, more organized, and help this joint process work more effectively, is my only point.
So what? Well, hold on, Steve, 1 second. So what are you suggesting there then? I missed that. I'm sorry.
No, I'm suggesting a combined meeting with all the parties, and it would really put the onus on the RTM to be structured and organized with their participation in that meeting. Is my
Okay.
point.
So all three. Okay.
Yes.
Steve?
If I may, Commissioner Wynn was going where you were not in the meeting, Mr. Chairman, when I asked the question about how the RTM conducts itself during the budget process. And what I was suggesting is that to go to Commissioner Matola's concerns about 39 or 49, or however member, wherever we end up with the RTM, showing up at this, what I call a workshop as opposed to a hearing. I want to distinguish between what I consider to be a public hearing where the public speaks and a workshop where you're actually reviewing budget items in that fashion. I was suggesting that perhaps we put in the charter a provision that encourages the RTM to participate in this workshop through its budget or finance committee, whatever entity is there and force the RTM to, in effect, develop it. And it doesn't stop other members from the RTM from attending the broad session. And again, to John Matola's point, Commissioner Matola's point, once it gets to the RTM, from having a retributive sessions where they invite everybody to come again before the entire body, it's kind of streamlines the process and develops a more mature committee approach. I think that's where Commissioner Wynn was going with it, to have designated members. And the best designated members would be members of a committee of jurisdiction, if there's a committee of jurisdiction. And that's where I was going with my question to the first select woman when she was there. And I think that's where Commissioner Wynn was going as well.
And under that, there would be no like workshop for the RTM as a whole then?
They would have the item before them, and that I think the way the first select woman presented it, all the bodies will reserve their rights, to Commissioner Matola's point.
Oh, yeah.
If they feel that they did not get adequate information in the tripartite session, they may just go ahead and invite everybody to come back before them. That would be unfortunate. We'd like to think everybody could do it. And what I was getting to was if you could reduce the number down to a workable group. So the RTM, which is the largest of the bodies, has a finance committee, a budget committee, whatever you want to call it. And that group would be the group that would be working on this initial process. It doesn't eliminate the other members of the RTM from being involved in the deliberations once it gets to the RTM. How they conduct their deliberations will be up to them. Hopefully they would operate through their committee and rely on their committee of jurisdiction and the expertise that is developed by those committees. That's the way legislative bodies try to work. But we can't mandate that behavior either of the Board of Finance or the RTM through charter. You can only try to encourage those efficiencies. So that's why I raised the question with the first select woman, that maybe we put in the provision that the RTM would be encouraged. There's language that we can develop to operate at that workshop through its committee of jurisdiction. And that might be a way to go to Commissioner Matola's concern about an overwhelming number of people at that session.
Okay. Marlene?
So where would we build in the public comment and public questions? Would that be for each group as it is now, or we need to have opportunity for the public to ask questions?
I think that this is just focused on this initial workshop.
Right, but they ask questions in each. There's an ability to ask questions in each group.
Oh, there
right
is
now.
At the workshops.
Yes.
There is a public component to
Well,
it.
there is.
I didn't know that.
John is shaking his head no. I mean, there's public comment available.
The Board of Finance has a public comment actual meeting. It's in the charter. We have that where the public can give their positions on the budget.
No, there's opportunity for the public to ask questions as the department heads present.
That happens along the way at each Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, and RTM?
It doesn't happen at the RTM.
No.
We only do it on the budget vote night when we vote. And the Board of Finance does it a little bit differently. They have that public comment session, and then they offer up like at the end of the evening or something for a comment.
Yeah, which is usually like around midnight.
Emails, obviously, as does
Well,
everyone else,
but you could do that for every board and commission. And I think I have to go back, but I think when Brenda presents to the Board of Selectmen, there's also opportunity for questions as well. So that is part of the process that we can't forget about.
I think any budget process, if I may, Mr. Chairman, clearly has to have a public hearing component. how it's done could be dictated in the charter, and I don't think that anyone is suggesting that that would be eliminated. I think that the way I hear the first select woman's proposal is that she's trying to, at least for this, what I call a workshop, and Commissioner Mottola could throw something at me if I'm describing it the wrong way, because I view it as a roll up your sleeves series of workshops with the department heads. It would seem to me that before the Board of Finance would vote on a budget, I presume they have some public component when they're ready to go with their document. I would assume the RTM does the same. It sounds like they may not, but it would seem to me that those bodies would benefit from having a public hearing before they take their actions.
Particularly the RTM.
We do. We take public comment before we vote.
Okay.
And we have the public hearing meeting too.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, I'd be surprised if that didn't exist. That's what
But that's a meeting that, yeah, that's all right. I wouldn't. I mean, that's not that well attended. I mean, there's hardly anybody that attends the Board of Finance meeting that's on a Saturday, and it's like two topics. It's Board of Education and seniors. I mean, that's the only two things that are discussed. So I just want to make sure that we don't forget about people who can ask questions, and as this is the people's money, right? So we don't want to leave them out of the process.
But when they participate, I'm not sure it's a question and answer process. When the public participates, they can make a statement.
Right.
They're not asking any members of the board to respond to the question. They're not asking department heads to respond to the question. They're making a declarative statement, and that's really the extent of their ability to interact in the process.
Pretty much, yeah, I would say that's accurate.
Yeah, and for the record,
I mean, the
charter
Board of Finance
currently
does does give their position at that hearing, at that public hearing.
And the charter currently has, Commissioner, a requirement for the Board of Finance to have a public hearing and for the RTM to have a public hearing. I don't think that anyone's suggesting that that would be eliminated in this process.
That's fine. I just want to make sure that we are, as we.
I wanted to see if I missed something.
We're going to unfold this process a little bit and make it a bit more. We're going to have to just take that into consideration, because if we're going to a bigger group, you're going to have to leave. You know, we have to build that into it.
All right. Well, I think that at this point, I'd like to suggest we move forward with this experiment. Well, let me see who is on board with moving forward with the 3-body workshop. That's essentially what the proposal is. And we're not changing anything else, the deliberations, the public hearing that's in the charter, that's it. And so all those in favor of doing that, just raise your hand. Okay.
Again, listen, I'll look at some language if it's drafted. I'm not opposed to looking at language. I'm telling you the reality of what's going to happen. That's all I'm saying.
I honestly think they're going to learn from you.
I want to see how it fits in this puzzle of a charter, because this is going to be a big issue. I'm telling you that right now, people. And I know maybe this was discussed and mentioned back in February, but we're in May, and this is not just going to be a 1 or 2 line sentence in this budget book or in this charter, and everyone's going to be happy with it.
We are going to invite the public to come.
There's so many issues that I'm thinking of. I wish it was something we could experiment with, and if it doesn't work, we can get rid of it the next year. But if you put it in the charter, it's going to be there for 10 years at least. That's my concern. So I'm interested in seeing the language, but I'm very fearful that we could be creating an albatross that we're stuck with for 10 years. That's my concern.
Well, we will ask our learned counsel to draft some language. I would suggest we do not draft it with layering a committee from the RTM. Let's just not confuse it and have the whole RTM invited, because then they're gonna wait for their own workshop. And you know what, in my mind, if after the joint workshop, each board only invites back half the department heads, you're that much further ahead of the game. You know, you don't have to. So then you haven't had 3 full presentations. You just say, all right, here are the ones that we want to dive further into based on what we saw. So I don't know. We'll see the language. We will have public comment on this. As with everything else, we are where we're headed. It is the change that I think will, we've heard, and to me it makes sense. But and I don't know how Jay Gross is on this, but we're gonna move forward that way, and we'll show you the language. Anything else on this action item number 1, Steve?
Can I just point out for the record, under the current charter, and I think John Mottola raised this, with the approval of the Board of Finance, the Board of Selectmen, with the approval of the Board of Finance, may modify and vary the budget submission process. That's the budget submission process, in the interest of efficiency or in the event of special circumstances. State law, and the chair may know this, a couple of years ago, there was a change in 2018 to charter revision that permits, by a 2/3 vote of the legislative body, that you can actually amend your charter for the sole purpose of modifying budget adoption dates. So if we address the issue of budget adoption dates, you don't have to wait 10 years. You can, through the RTM, change the actual budget adoption dates by a 2/3 vote of the RTM. The General Assembly, for whatever reasons, I was not part of that issue, but they permitted it, and the major reason was they wanted to make sure that every aspect could have an impact. That the adoption date may include, but not limited to, applicable dates related to executive presentation of a budget. So it's everything: public hearings, fiscal authority action, publications, referenda, final budget adoption. So the language on budget adoptions dates seems narrow, but it covers a wide array of concerns, so that by establishing this in the charter, you probably have a little elasticity under 7-191B. I'd ask the town attorney to take a look at that and see if he agrees with me, so that if we run into the issues that Commissioner Mottola is concerned about, that there might be a change, and it would be up to the RTM to make that change. They'd have to have a 2/3 vote of the RTM. Presumably, the Board of Finance, Board of Selectmen, the RTM would be working together to try to create the efficiencies. But in the budget adoption process, there is a little more flexibility than you have in any other provision of the charter.
Okay.
Just so I'd raise that for your purposes.
So maybe we can. Thank you. That's helpful.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Unless John.
Hey, Steve, what's that section again of the general statute 7 what?
I was speaking at the top of my lungs, but I was on mute. 7-191 lowercase b. It's a freestanding
Thank you.
provision. Yeah, it's an interesting, it was one that was sprung on me about 1.5 years ago. I did not know about it. It's a very interesting provision.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Okay. Now we are going to pick back up where we left off, on the RTM. the 30 members, 2.3B. We had, just to recap, we had agreed to leave the Board of Finance at 9, constables 4, appointed by the Board of Selectmen, 2 from each party. And now we're at the RTM, the 30 members. And John, you had spoken on that, and I think Pam, you had your hand raised, and you probably don't remember exactly what you were going to say, but I put you on the spot.
How did you know that? I thought we put the 30 people to bed at the last meeting. I left. That's where we are. We're at 30, and you know that's was my understanding. I don't want to go backwards to 40 and rehash that whole thing again. We went through every iteration and we landed at 30. Regarding the minority representation clause, I want to keep it in.
Okay. Anyone else on the matter? John. Matilda.
So that's fine. I'm not in favor of the minority representation clause. I don't think it's necessary. You know, I would go along just in the spirit of moving forward with a 30-member RTM if we didn't have the minority representation clause, but I'm not sure committee members want to go in that direction. I just think for district and representation that the citizens of a particular district should be able to elect who they want to represent, the top 3 vote getters, regardless of party. And as I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, the RTM has swung back and forth between each party. I just don't see the need to go in that direction, respectfully. So, I'm not going to keep talking about it, but that's my position. Thank you.
All right. I mean, I would just say to that, you know, and I acknowledge the fact that the control of the body of the RTM as a whole has switched, but I think that we can all acknowledge that there are districts that have been held by one party or another for a long, long time. And I think that that's what this is trying to address. And if minority representation is good enough for every board and commission practically in town and the Board of Education, then why not have it for the people who kind of represent you in your neighborhood? So that's kind of my feeling on it. I think it would lead to a more kind of bipartisan fashion of, you know, kind of neighborhoods, and there wouldn't be this kind of stronghold of one neighborhood being controlled by one party for, you know, election after election. That's why I'm in favor of it. John Wynn?
Just in further support of that thought, Brian, just think about a neighborhood meeting that the RTM is, you know, tasked with holding periodically. And if it's one party representation, you would have a lot of residents that might not go to that meeting because they don't feel they're being represented by the people hosting the meeting. So I think this would provide the opportunity for bipartisan participation in neighborhood style meetings and get a better sense of what the residents of the town in each individual district desire.
Okay. Chris?
I do agree that I think the 30 member issue has been put to bed last time. Actually, I agree with John on the minority representation. I think we've been doing this way, obviously, for a long time. I think if I was a more eloquent, like the professors, somehow it seems that with RTM, it is not direct representation, but it's as close to direct representation and one person, one vote. Because it is a neighborhood thing as opposed to the town at large. I think it is, it can be, and I think it is, although I guess I don't know in all cases, that if people have concerns, no matter what the party, nobody's looking at what party they have, they're going to try and handle the concerns. So my leaning is to leave it as is.
Marlene, did you?
Yeah, I also thought that we put 30 to bed last meeting, and I am in favor of minority representation.
Okay. I know that Jay Gross sent something in. I read it, and he said something about 20 members, 10, but then if not 30. But I couldn't glean from that whether or not he was talking about minority representation. So I'm not sure where he is on this matter, but I think by our comments and survey without a formal vote, it seems to be 4-2 at this point to leave the minority representation in there, and then we could take public comment and see what happens. But that's I think that that's the way to go. What's the next section, Steve? Oh, Steve.
Yeah, I jumped over while we were talking because it hadn't been discussed, except I think it might have been one of the commissioners that raised the issue. Maybe it was Commissioner Wynn. I don't want to falsely attribute this to him, but I had in the document greened in sections for the ZBA and the Board of Assessment Appeals, and the constables was included, but we've addressed that issue. Somebody had raised the issue of whether or not these elected bodies, and I don't know how serious or how concerted it was, but I didn't want to ignore it, wanted to move these two bodies, ZBA and BAA, to appointed status. Am I correct? Did somebody on the commission raise that, or am I wrong?
John Wynn.
I think I possibly raised that. We did discuss it. I thought last week we might have decided to leave it the way that it is with them being elected positions. I don't want to speak for everyone, but I thought that's kind of, we didn't go very deeply into that discussion.
I just wanted to make sure we didn't ignore it. If that's the case, if there's no overwhelming desire to address the issue, we can move on. I didn't want to ignore it.
Okay, appreciate that. I think that I believe Jay Gross was in favor of the minority representation.
I agree. It's John Wynn, Brian. I agree with that. I read his note, and it indicates he recognizes a 10-3 structure ensures the minority voice. So I think embedded in that sentence is the belief that minority representation is part of the 10-3 view that he was expressing.
Yeah, all right. I'll be that as it may.
I read it the same way.
All right.
All right, so have we agreed that we're going to leave ZBA and BAA the same way? I just didn't want to ignore it since I still had it greened in.
Yeah, unless anyone else has a comment.
Right. Then the next issue, and this is an issue that both Pam, Commissioner Iacono, and Commissioner Mottola had talked about. I believe it's the 4-year cycle. Am I correct on that? That was the problem with the Board of Ed. And if you take a look at section 2.4 C2, I try to address the issue. And I don't know if Commissioner Mottola, I wanted him to put his eyes on it to see whether he thought that helped.
John.
So I don't know if it helps, Steve, to be honest. But here's my thought process. I want the Board of Ed to be, just like the Board of Finance, can be a 6-3 majority minority body. And for some reason, and I'm not sure why, it never seems to, it's always 5-4. And I need to really just, and I apologize, just to really look at this in more detail. So that's all I'm trying to get to. And I think what happened was years ago, it got messed up.
Then I would simply ask John, take a look at it. Maybe we can talk about it. I think this gets us there. Because in the 5 cycle, you have the 3-2. And in this cycle with minority party representation, the way the statute works with 4 members, you can have a 3-1. And that would get us potentially to a 6-3, depending on where the cycles take you. It could be 5-4, by the way.
Yeah.
If
Right.
if
Can
one
I
party wins the 3-2 year and the other party wins the 4-1-3-1 year, you're in 5-4, is what you are. There's no guarantee of avoiding, but you could get to 6-3.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is totally fine. I don't.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to interrupt, John. I think, and I don't mean to speak for you, Commissioner Mottola, but he and I are on the same page trying to let the voters pick who their people are. The only thing is, when I was reading section 1, 23B 1F, it says up to 3 candidates in each RTM district. I think that's just a typo.
That's a typo.
But I couldn't figure out, and maybe it's an offline discussion. Maybe you, me, and John Mottola can hop on a call, and we could just do a deeper dive so we don't hold everybody up on this.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that.
Because I still was trying to figure it out on paper, what you wrote, and I still can't get that one thing to work. So maybe if you just walked Mottola and I through it, then
why don't we plan?
Then we won't bore the commissioners and the public with the minutia, because this is like a headbanger.
I'll make a note that Mottola, Iacone, and Mednick will talk. Is that right, Mr. Chairman?
Can I just ask one question, just from my understanding?
Yeah.
Oh, in the minority representation, shouldn't we be shooting for a 5-4 on a 9-person board? Isn't that the whole point of it?
6-3.
You could have 6-3.
6-3.
It's not simple majority that's required by minority party representation. It is a cap majority representation. And with the class of 4, it makes it very difficult. Because the way it currently works, it's a 2-2 outcome, which means no one votes.
I understand. Let's just say they're all the same, all 9 were up at the same time. Would the rules sort of require a 5-4?
No. A 9-member body, I think you can have a 6-3 and a 9-4.
6-3.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll leave it to the law.
That's how Board of Finance is.
Yeah.
It's 6-3. It's how they wrote the last charter language that the default became 5-4, which is great, except for the fact that you are eliminating voter choice.
Yeah, which is what happened this year, right? Or
Correct.
2021.
This was the year where you didn't get voter choice. You should, but the parties are gaming the system.
Right.
All right, so the 3 of us will talk before the next meeting.
Perfect.
All right, Mr. Chairman?
Sounds good. What's next?
I'm looking. Well, we kind of addressed, we've addressed the issue. The next one I had was 3.2A1B, but we've already acted on the issue of minority party representation, so we've done that. All right, let me ask your pleasure on 3.2 A2, reapportionment. Give me some direction. I handed out a document last meeting or 2 meetings ago.
Yeah.
Background document number 9 on reapportionment, where we have the system we have currently, where you have the 4 people on the council, on the RTM, that make determinations about what the districts will look like, and a number of other jurisdictions have reapportionment committees that are outside, ultimately have to report to the RTM. It's ultimately an RTM decision, but you have bipartisan, multi-partisan reapportionment groups that assure equitable partisan representation, but also allow for some unaffiliated voters to be participating in the process as well, because they're affected and they have no one to vote their way on the legislative body unless you have a minority party person who is unaffiliated with a party other than D's or R's. And so I didn't know whether you wanted to leave this the way it is, because we're basically leaving the issue of composition of the RTM to the RTM, or whether you wanted to have a proposal for a nonpartisan redistricting group that would include the registrars who actually work day to day. They tend to sit on these bodies, but also include unaffiliated voters or other non-majority party voters. And so that's the direction I'm looking for. If you want to leave it the way it is, that's fine. But if you wanted to go in a different direction, do you want me to try to draft something that would show you a model? Has anybody looked at the background document? Want to give me any direction on this issue?
Pam?
I'm actually going to ask a courtesy if the commission wouldn't mind just tabling this for the time being, because I have to hop off for another meeting which shouldn't take very long, and I can get back on.
Yeah.
And I would, if you would indulge me, love to participate in this conversation, since I've been a part of these things now twice. If nobody minds, if they would just, so I could get on this other call, and then we could take this one item up at a later time, either later in the meeting or on Thursday.
That's fine with me. Anybody have an objection to that? Okay.
Thank you. I really appreciate it, and I'm just going to hop off, and I'll get back on hopefully relatively quickly. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right.
So the next issue is that I have marked, I don't know if there's any controversy in it, is on in Article 4, Section 4.2B1C, which addresses the various contracts that go to the Board of Selectmen.
Hi, Steve, and everyone. This is Attorney Baldwin chiming in. I raised this before, and I think it was discussed by the first select woman, that the current need to review all contracts as is currently done is very inefficient, and also kind of contrary to what happens in most other municipalities. And it was my understanding that there was going to be language that was more pinpointed as to those contracts which do need Board of Selectmen approval or other board approvals. And this language seems to go back to the old charter language with something slightly different, but it still leaves in the hands of the Board of Selectmen the requirement to review all contracts, even though those contracts have been approved through the budget process.
The town attorney is correct. He has raised that issue. I don't think we've addressed the issue. I added a couple things around that, which I think need to be there, but I do know the issue, probably the threshold. And there's another standard, frankly, that if the item is an item that's in the budget, in the approved budget, and it is 1 year or less, the issue is, why would there be any need for any additional approval? I think, is that what you're raising, Jim?
That's one of the points that I'm raising. Yes, we'll start with that one. I also have some questions about the other language which has been put in here, but let's take that one first.
John Matola. We don't hear you.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that.
Oh,
So you're saying, Jim Baldwin, that if an item's been approved in the budget, but there has to be some type of a contract that's related to that appropriation, that the contract has to come back to the Board of Selectmen for further approval?
Yes, that's the way the current charter
Oh.
reads, and that's the way they've been doing it for the past 2.5 years.
Can you give me like an example so I can understand that?
It'd be easier to pick a few exceptions, but every single contract, John, which is in any way negotiated, the terms are negotiated. Those all have to go for approval before the Board of Selectmen, whether it's a Parks and Rec project or the DPW project, you name it, it has to go.
Okay.
And so my ask on behalf of the administration, and I think even prior administrations who didn't always follow those guidelines which are in the charter, is simply to put into the charter provisions that allow such standard contracts already with appropriations already approved to not require Board of Selectmen approval. Of course, they have to go through the bidding process and all that, and if there are bonds involved and the like, or statutory grounds for having it reviewed by other boards, in particular the RTM, then by all means that should remain.
So is there a way, Steve probably can look at some language. I think I'd be fine with that concept, looking at it. I would like some type of a certification that's given to the Board of Selectmen that all appropriate bidding requirements have been complied with, if you go that direction. Just so we have that. And I'm not saying this would happen, but it could happen. I just want to make sure that everything's done properly, especially what we've been through the last few years in Fairfield. So, but I imagine there's language out there, Steve Mednick, that we can take a look at how other municipalities do it.
I'm trying to figure out what the offensive language in this is, Mr. Town Attorney. Is it B1B or is it somewhere in C? That's what I'm trying to figure out.
Well, read A for me, because I want to make sure I'm reading from the same document, Steve.
Okay. All contracts that shall be a party shall be so. Yeah, that's pretty comprehensive. Yes. Yeah, there's language we can do, and what we were doing, if you may recall, because without the Board of Selectmen, the issue was what was the function of the RTM with regard to contracts. What we did was we said that's not really a legislative function. If there are, I think I have language I developed that I just took out because we were going to do it with the RTM, and we were going to have a reporting requirement on contracts so that all contracts would be reported on a quarterly basis, so that in this case, the Board of Selectmen can take a look at it and say, hey, you were messing around here. You were doing options to get around the multi-year problem, or you were doing this, or whatever the case may be. So we could definitely draft language if that's that's clearly the proposal of the town attorney. If that's the inclination of the CRC, I could definitely draft language that would basically give the first select person the ability to execute contracts so long as they're within the approved budget of a department.
And quite frankly, I thought that's where we were, and then we were going in the direction of a smaller RTM body with some more contract review authority.
And language now came back in. I'm sorry, I didn't remember that. This language now came back in, and I'm glad that the town attorney is raising the issue. So what's your pleasure? Do you want me to try to come up with language?
Yes, Yeah, that would be great. I'd be happy to work with you on it too, so that we
Absolutely.
can meet everybody's concerns here.
I'm asking the commission also. That's
Yeah, I would agree with that. We got all thumbs up, it looks like.
all right. So 4.2 B 1A. Fix, Ray, budgeted. Okay,
Yeah. And I think we need to look at the entire section, but let's do that.
then the town attorney and I will look at the section. All right with everybody?
That sounds great. Thank you very much for doing that.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Town Attorney. Appreciate it. I think, oh, I think we're done. We're not done. We have to decide what we want to do about the chief administrative
Right.
officer or town administrator. That is still an unresolved issue. That's 4.3F.
I was in favor of town administrator
Okay. What about
think
the
it-
language that Chris,
as applicable.
yeah. No, the language I have in front of you is not redlined. I'm trying to remember what Chris Brogan's language was trying to remedy. Chris, do you remember?
No. I did a quick read of these before, and the second version seemed better, and I think a little bit more concise. I think the first, if that was mine, maybe I did make it a little bit wordy, putting too much in there. The second, I had the impression was a little bit more concise.
How does it, has everybody looked at the two? I think it is more concise. I would agree. I don't think it changes anything. We could, and if we want to call it town administrator, I could easily insert that in there.
Yeah, and I agree. I agree with Marlene. I like that, the town administrative term.
Right. Yeah.
Why is that? Is it because to me, sorry, John Matola has a question.
No. Go ahead, Brian. I'm sorry. You
Oh
go.
no. To me, it sounds more like a town manager, like they're gonna be the, I don't know, maybe it's because I'm familiar with the CAO role in other towns, but.
Well, and I will defer to that because I don't know either. I like it, but I like both better than COO because I know what that is.
Yeah, I
So,
agree with that. I agree with Chris.
But
This is not,
keep in mind,
you know.
Yeah.
can I just say, with all due respect to the chair, Darien has a town administrator, and we described the position as the principal managerial aide to the first select person, versus being a chief executive. So I just didn't know whether that changed your thoughts, Mr. Chairman.
It's a mouthful, but I mean, it embodies, I kind of think, what we're doing.
Yeah.
But
I don't care what your title is. You guys tell me.
what's it called again?
In Darien and other towns, they call it town administrator.
Oh.
But the language we have here is that it's the principal managerial aide to the first select person, performs duties as assigned by the first select person, is an unclassified employee of the town, and serves at the pleasure of the first select person. So regardless of what it's called, even if we called it a town manager, it's not what is classically known as a town manager. I mean, that's the only thing I'd say.
This is like, yeah, I don't care. I mean, it's
All right.
either.
I just want to
everybody
lay your
says
concerns, that's all.
Yeah, no, it's fine. If everybody thinks town administrator, I'm not going to be the skunk in the punch bowl or whatever. The John.
So the only thing about this, I'm fine with town administrator. I support this type of position. I don't want to open up a can of worms here, but I'm going to anyway. I think this position, I know it's appointed by the first select person, but I think it's such an important position that that it should be approved by the RTM. That's all. don't think I'm asking for too much on something like this, because we want to make sure this person has those sufficient qualifications, so on and so forth. And I just think it's that type of position that's so important that there should be some type of an approval process. So I would like to hear everyone's thoughts about that.
Pam?
Maybe I'm
Yeah.
out on a limb.
Yeah, I absolutely do not think it should be approved by the RTM. It's going to turn into such a political nightmare. Don't hamstring somebody like that. Allow them the professional fortitude to hire somebody that they can work with. And no. I respect a lot of things but not no. I'm a hard no on that.
So my question to you guys is, what happens if the person, whoever is appointed, doesn't meet some of these qualifications? I guess the remedy would be you wouldn't fund the position. I don't know. I mean, Steve, what do you think of that? How do we get around that?
Yeah.
What's that?
If you could bring a Quo Warranto action, if you want,
Okay.
if the person's not qualified for the position, and the legislative body felt that that was the case, or the Board of Finance, or anybody, a private citizen, thought it was not complying with the provision, you could defund it, you could bring a Quo Warranto. There's a number of things that could be done.
Fair enough. And maybe I'm making too much of it, so I'll leave it alone. Thank you for hearing me out.
By the way, for those of you who have never heard the term Quo Warranto, today there was a very big Quo Warranto case in New Haven where the Superior Court ruled that the mayor's acting police chief needs to be removed because she was in there without authority. So it's an ancient concept, but they are used from time to time. So it does work.
We've used it a few times at Bridgeport too.
Yeah.
I give some pause to all these associations listed at the end. I kind of wondering what the point is here. If this is, what I mean, we should give some guidance as to what this person should be experienced in, but I'm not sure how well it serves us to say. I mean, it just seems like we're listing a bunch of things to no end. And then there's also this kind of hanging portion about pre-qualifying a candidate. Oh.
I think the objective of the pre-qualification that I put in other charters was to get around the question that Commissioner Mottola just raised. If you have your Human Resources Department pre-qualifying them, they've complied with the general requirements of the charter and whatever job description is created, then the first select person chooses from those candidates. They've been pre-qualified on that level. With regard to the listing of the organizations, done it in the past, sometimes in the body, sometimes in a commentary section, in the footnotes, mainly to establish a context where people might say, where do I find out what the qualification should be? And most of the organizations that are listed here, Mr. Chairman, are organizations that deal with these issues. And that's the only reason why they're listed. If you think it's too much clutter in the constitutional document, we could do a comment at the bottom of the page, including the organizations that existed at the time that the charter was adopted, so that it eliminates some of the clutter.
It does feel cluttered to me. That would somewhat stifling. I would much prefer that, but
move it to
I think that's a good suggestion.
All right.
I do too.
Move to footnote. Done. Anything else on this section? So we'll go with the more concise. I'll just take a look at the two sections next to each other to see if we're not missing, if anything is missing. But we'll go with the vice chair's language that's underscored.
One question on it. I remember discussing last week a limited description of activities this individual would undertake.
Oh, yes. That was raised. I don't know if we concluded anything.
Right. I don't recall
like,
what the conclusion was either, but I just wanted
Yeah.
to raise the point.
If people want to go in that direction, I can easily put together a list of some
I
of the
think-
towns that do delineate some
Yeah.
of these things.
John.
And I think that, hey, and to John Wynn's point, we read some language from some other municipalities that had some of those things listed. I think Greenwich was a good one. John Wynn, if you take a look at that, and Steve, I think that was one of them. I think you sent us this.
Stratford has a good
Right.
list, and so does Darien.
So I would advocate for having something, have it be abbreviated so that it doesn't clutter things up too much, but gives a little bit of a clarity to what the expectation would be.
I agree with that too.
All right, if that's all right with everybody, I'll come up with a list. I'll use the language, the Brogan language, set up the footnote, and come up with a list. I'll leave the list on the side, and you can figure out what you want to put in. All right?
Okay.
The next item, unless you want to move back now that the commissioner's back, do we want to go back to the issue of the reapportionment committee?
Yes, please.
So I was looking for guidance. I think we were at the point where I just said, any guidance?
So, may I jump in? Is that okay?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so just so I understand it the way we are right now, the way the charter reads, if we leave everything exactly like this, the RTM would be limited to a 30-member district, a 30-member body. And then the reapportionment piece, they could still determine the number of districts. And then the committee is still set up the way it is, 2 and 2. Is that a correct reading of how this is?
Yes, that's the way it is right now.
Okay.
I haven't changed. I haven't touched it.
Okay, and then there had been some talk about setting the number of districts in the charter, but we decided not to go. That was not your recommendation, Steve. It was to leave it, to do it this way that's in here.
Well, my recommendation was 27 and 9, but I thought that last time we decided on a number without specifying the districts.
I thought we said 10 and 3 personally. That's what I thought we said.
I could be wrong. I willing to stand corrected, but I don't recall that.
Because this was going to be my takeaway on this. I thought it was 10 and 3, and that we were putting it in the charter that it was 10 and 3. That was my understanding. And if that's the case, I think that's personally a good thing, and you can leave this reapportionment language exactly the way that it is, and have the RTM do the 2 and the 2. The reason why I think that it should be specific in the charter is because the fight, for lack of a better word, is not over the borderlines. It's over 10 and 3, 10 and 4, 9 and 7, whatever. And honestly, if I were to speak from the heart here, in 2012, the Republicans goosed it all up because they were set on doing it a certain way with a certain number of districts and a certain population, and the whole thing fell apart. And now we're in 2022, and the Democrats are set in a certain way and, heading down the same giant headache. The only commission that actually went and did its work in a bipartisan way and tuned out the noise of the DTC and the RTC was the one I sat on in 2015, and sadly they're the exception and not the rule. So I don't know that the RTM deserves the privilege of setting the districts and the number of members, I think that that privilege belongs with the voters. I do think that the RTM with the 2 and 2 is capable of doing the district boundary lines in a fair and reasonable way. There's not much, to do there. You move one street, it moves a whole nother street, and you work through that. But really, the consternation and the political part is over that one piece. And I think if you fix that in the charter and give that privilege to the voter and take it away from the elected members who have a hard time downsizing or upsizing themselves, that you eliminate that problem. So that's my personal belief on that. And, I would advocate for having 10 and 3 in the charter and, leaving the other portion of this the way it is. If you just want to leave it in the 30 and let them decide whether it's going to be 10 districts or multiples of 3, that's fine with me as well. But I don't think we've earned that privilege.
Okay. Any other thoughts on this? So what would you have us do then?
I would have you just fix the number of districts and fix the membership. We fix the membership at 30, fix it at 10, and leave this reapportionment language the way it is. Let them go in and draw the boundary lines.
So we don't need to change anything in this?
Well, you'd have to just add in that the 10 would be fixed.
Well, you're going to have to change 3.2A1B, which says the voting districts of the town, including the number of districts for the election of RTM members, shall be established by ordinance adopted by the RTM.
Well, you'd have to change that sentence. Yes, you're right. I'm sorry. Yep.
And everybody wanted the 10 districts, right? We went back and forth, and everyone screamed about.
Well, that's where we landed last meeting. I left there with 10 and 3, and so that's what I thought this document was going to say today. And
it gives
I
some
rest my case.
certainty to yeah. I don't see, I don't honestly know when it changed from 12 to 10, because that's what happened, right?
Yeah, and the debate isn't over. I don't want to rehash that we're at 10. We're at 10, but I just don't.
My only point with that is that happened over 10 years ago. So it's not like this happens every couple of years that you want to change the districts.
It was 10 and 5, right? Is that what it was?
It was 10 and 5. And if you think about it, a while ago it was 12 or so.
That's my point.
But if you think about it, you're only supposed to open your charter up every 10 years, right? You do reapportionment every 10 years. You can revisit this with the voters having the privilege of picking out what it should be. It's logical if you think about it.
Yeah, I think I thought that we were looking to change language in here, make some clarifications, because I looked at the document you sent, it was a time or two ago, Steve, but I thought we were looking for like a tiebreaker or some like better way to organize it in that sense. But that's kind of the unanswerable question of how do you have a bipartisan committee with a tiebreaker? So
it's that hasn't been the problem. The drawing of the lines is the easy part, because you once you have your number and once you have what you're doing, you literally figure out what your split district is, and then you start moving people based on the 10% rule, and you can only move in census blocks. The politicalization of the whole thing has become over the number of districts and the people.
Oh, okay. Well, then that would be my suggestion, is to put the 10 districts in there.
Yeah, put the 10 in, and then take out that one sentence about them setting the number of districts, and then they just do the reapportionment.
And what about the standard? I have language here, no more than 30 members. if they want to reduce the number of members, they can, but they're going to have to do it within the context of a 10-district system. Am I correct on that? I don't know why they would want to change the number of members during the 10-year cycle before redistricting, but I'm trying to get a sense, are we locking in in the constitutional cycle, in the charter cycle?
They wouldn't be opening it up anyway.
30 members. So,
Well,
so it's not,
they wouldn't
so
be
locking
opening
in
it
the
up
30
anyway, right?
What?
You wouldn't be opening it up anyway, right? Because you wouldn't do it again until reapportionment.
Well, right now, they have the ability to change the voting districts and the number of districts for the election of RTM members by ordinance. It doesn't say at reapportionment time. I don't know if you've ever done it in the non-reapportionment context.
I thought, Steve, that it says right here. What is it again? Hold on, sorry, because I bounced out of this.
The voting districts of the town, including the number of districts for the election of RTM members, shall be as established by ordinance adopted by the RTM. That's the current charter.
But it says, there's a sentence that says, upon it, that's triggered by the General Assembly reapportionment. We can't go in and change it at any time.
That's the reapportionment of voting districts. And so the General Assembly does the reapportionment. I'll look back and see where this is in the document. I'm not trying to argue here. You can do whatever you want to do. I'm not sure they're connected. Reapportionment is reapportionment. So when you're doing a reapportionment, you're following the process as it comes out of the General Assembly. That's set for 10 years. I thought there was an independent power here to...
No, not... And maybe it's Jim Baldwin on. I thought maybe, can he jump in? I thought that it said upon that, and then this whole ordinance kicks in. Am I wrong?
I can see where the problem is, but I have to take a harder look at it. Where Steve is the? I'm looking at the reapportionment of voting districts, but where's the language that gives the RTM the power to?
I think it's
2AB.
Article 2, Section 2.
Oh.
Section 3.2B.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
3.2AB.
Yeah.
Page 15 of the document, right?
That's I agree with you, John.
Yep.
Where? Where's Jim?
I'm here.
Let me just...
I'm at Matola.
You know what? This is an interesting topic. That's an interesting point you just raised, Attorney Mednick.
Yeah. Let me look. I'm going into the body of the... I'm going into the computer here, see if I could find where I got this, because I didn't make it up.
No, you didn't. No, you did. You did not make it up. You definitely. I'm looking right at it.
Yeah.
I have to leave for about 15 minutes for a 7 o'clock call, but it shouldn't be that long. But the vice chair has agreed to take the helm, so I appreciate that again. Thank you.
This Attorney Baldwin, the only thing I can think of right now is that they've been read together as working together, but they don't make direct reference to one another, but perhaps they should, to Pam's point.
Yeah, because right now they're in 2.8A1, the voting districts with the exact language done by ordinance. The next paragraph is after completion, voting districts shall be established by ordinance proposed by a committee. I suppose they can be read together. When you separate them out, they are problematic. So
and I think that's how it's been interpreted over the years, but it could use clarification.
Yes, I think that definitely, I think that 1B has to be linked with 2. So in effect, what you're doing is you're establishing, and the truth of the matter is, if you don't have to do charter revision every 10 years unless we put a provision in here mandating that you do it every 10 years. There's no state statutory requirement. I've had towns that haven't done them for 40 years, and 30 years. Not so many anymore. I think it's changing, but most of the charters I do, we haven't talked about this, have a provision that require a charter revision every 10 years. And there's a good reason, especially if you lock in your districts, is a good reason.
So simply, Attorney Baldwin again, simply by referencing the reapportionment of voting districts language in the paragraph above, you can solve that problem and not require charter revision to make that change, but it can just happen every 10 years after the census.
Correct. You could do that, Jim. Yeah, you could definitely lock them in together, and so that the redistricting ordinance would occur post reapportionment. So basically, you say there's reapportionment, then you redistrict. This is how you do it.
Right.
Is everybody okay with that concept? Then you're locking in. Do you want to lock in? And if I missed it last week, please tell me I missed it. Do we want to lock in the 3 times 10 is what is the question.
So let me understand. The proposal would be lock in the 3 times 10 and then leave in this clause, but it really only applies to, as Pam said, the borders, which would be effectively every 10 years because that's when the census changes.
Basically connect subsection lowercase b and A1B with section 3.2b. Make sure that they are connected irrevocably.
Okay. John Matola?
But the way our charter reads this proposal is that there can be no more than 30 RTM members. That doesn't lock in 30 forever. You could get back to the same issue that Pam said is always an issue, that there'll be some type of a fight 10 years from now about how many RTM members that we want. So it's not going to go away entirely. It may help a little bit, but so that's just wanted to make that comment.
Were you proposing to just lock it at 30, that it no up, no down until the next charter revision?
Honestly, that's how I thought it was going to be, but if you want to leave it, if you want to leave it be and you know, let the fight continue to be over the number of districts. I'm just telling you what it's been. It's been hyper political, and like I said, I was only on one committee that it was the exception when it should be the rule, and it's not good. It's not good, guys. It's not good.
I mean, I would be okay if you want to cap it at 30 and keep it 30 in the charter. That's what you have, period. And then the next charter revision, whoever's doing it can look at whether we want more than 30 or less than 30. That way we get rid of this, as Pam said, these issues.
I really kind of agree with John. As much as I don't like being as high as 30 as we are, I'm telling you, they're not going to take themselves down. It's really bad. It's really bad. It's bad. We don't deserve the privilege. All right. Okay. Well, let me rephrase it. It should be a privilege that's given to the voters.
So instead of no more than 30, it's 30?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Attorney Baldwin, one more thought is to have a change in the number, which would be only a reduction in this case, to be by a 2/3 majority or some super majority, meaning there's consensus, but I'm just throwing that out there.
Yeah, I think it should be fixed at 30. I think if it went below 30, other things should change anyway, which are going to be beyond the scope of that committee. So I kind of agree with fix it at 30. And then if I go by, if you're saying that takes the problem out of this, I guess that takes away the need for a tiebreaker, in my opinion.
And then fix the 10 districts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right, got it. Is everybody all right with that? Is that the clear direction I should follow? All right, excellent. Thank you, Commissioner Iacono, for making me see the error of my ways.
Well, let's hope I'm right.
Well, everybody's on board. So
that's my wing and a prayer there.
You are now right.
I hope so.
All right. So, where were we? Okay. So the next issue is another town attorney issue. I think I alluded to it. This is in 4.5. Official bonds. Does the town attorney want to speak, or you want me to paraphrase your position?
You're very good at paraphrasing, Steve. Please.
Okay. My understanding, and this is generally true around the state, is that these provisions are ancient, and most communities are very well insured. I don't know if Kerma is. I don't know if we're associated with Kerma in Fairfield or not, but they have not had bonds in a number of years, and therefore, what's the purpose of this provision?
And Jim Baldwin again, I'll just add to that. This provision has not seriously been followed for quite a while by our prior administrations and the one that inherited the situation. So it's really archaic and is not really of any use because we are fully insured and to a much higher extent than what's required by these provisions of the current charter.
So if everybody's okay with that, we will repeal that provision.
Yeah, I'm going to trust their advice that we've gotten. I don't know enough about it.
I think that's it in this section. So what I will do, with your permission, we are meeting Thursday, right?
We are.
With your permission, I will clean it up and get it out to you so you have it, hopefully what would be a final version for Thursday night.
All right. Sounds good.
Do you want to go back to the budget section? And again, I'll defer to I think there were some other questions that people had. I think Pam Iacono, Commissioner Iacono, had a memo on the budget, and I think the town attorney may have a point of view on the budget. We did act on the proposal that the first select woman brought before us. Do we want to look at anything else in the budget section?
If there are items to look at, I think I would be happy if we could just put that document to bed as well. Yeah. If everyone has the willingness to stay on to do that.
Yes, I was wondering, could someone remind me what were my budget comments?
I'll read them.
So you had a memo, I heard too.
I know. What was my memo? I don't remember a memo.
Oh, it was an email review.
Was that with the timeline?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Got a couple here. Oh no, that's in the department section, which we'll take up next or at the next meeting. So I think that you were talking about It's all confusing about hearings and meetings, and I agree with you completely on that. That's why
Oh,
I was talking about workshops versus hearings versus meetings, and I'm happy to defer to those of you who are practitioners in the community, Commissioner Mottola, who serves on the Board of Finance, to figure out the proper lexicon terminology for those sections when I start developing the language, which I'll hopefully give you on Thursday for the stuff that we talked about earlier tonight. And I will fix that and try to make that work. And I guess the question is, you repeat a lot of sections here, but I'm not sure. You're just saying that the terminology is confusing. So the real question is, what do we want to do about the timing of these hearings? We know that everything moves back from the budget meeting, which is the first Monday in May. Then everything is reverse engineered up to that date. Isn't that what we're trying to do here? Is how do we get to that first Monday in May?
I think that we changed it, or my recommendation upon meeting with the finance director was to change it to the second Monday in May, and then work backwards from that.
Okay. All right.
And then I think that all got condensed. I think I had spoken with Attorney Baldwin about that. Did that language make it over to you, Steve?
Yes, I have some of that language, but I want to make sure that everybody is okay with all the elements of that language. If everybody would like, and this might expedite things a little bit, I know that Attorney Baldwin has had some discussions on this issue. We've acted on the first select woman's proposal. If you don't mind, I'll be happy to take a look at Attorney Baldwin's language so that we have something active before you as opposed to kind of trudging through it. And I can get that out to you tomorrow so that you'll have plenty of time before Thursday's meeting to take a look at it.
That'd be helpful.
Does that make sense to everybody? All right. Otherwise, we'll just kind of be tripping through the document. I will fix that. So you'll see in it the modified process that we approved earlier this evening, plus some language that the town attorney has provided for me. That's the budget. Do we want to start tackling item number 4? How's everybody feeling, or just put it off till Thursday?
I'd like to keep going if we can.
Okay. So.
Agreed.
All right, so let me go through. I sent out action item number 4. I don't remember when, over the weekend or maybe Friday. I don't remember. It came sometime over the weekend. And what I did is kind of restructured all of the elements of Article 7, 8, and 9. I was trying to go further, but it's really hard to go further and get cleaner because you have so many different appointing officials that there's no other way to break it up. So I basically followed the current format of your document. And so I guess the first question, and so what I also did is I also plotted in the document all of the questions that had been raised in our work plan to make sure that we captured every work plan question related. So the first ones are in the notes next to 8.1. Question is, should there be a standard appointment and approval process, not process, for department heads? And I assume what that means would be, should the chief executive make all the appointments and somebody approve the appointments? Generally, that's what that means. A mayor, first selectman, makes all the department head appointments. My impression, based on the culture and the process we've been going through, especially at this late date in the process, that we're not going to go to the planning and zoning board or the police commission or the fire commission and these other entities that have appointment authority and say we're taking it away. We'll see in November, see who wins. So I don't know if there's an appetite to address that issue, but that's the first issue that was listed under the work plan.
We're on 8.1.
8.1.
So we would have to add our town administrator to that. A.
Town administrator will be placed in there as an appointment by the first select person. And I haven't gone through this yet to do the gender neutrality.
That's fine. And then we'll probably add the constables in B, right?
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, sorry, John Matola has his hand up. I missed that.
That's all right. Hey, Steve, would you, and maybe you don't put it here, but would you put the chief of staff position here? It's in the charter previously. I don't know. I'm just asking if you would.
Is it in the current charter?
You have it in
Well,
there.
I think we have language. It's not in our current charter now, but we have language in our proposed charter revision.
Correct.
Where
So you
the
want me to
first
put it in here?
person has the chief of staff.
All right.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I agree. Put it in A,
Got it.
please.
Got it. Constables. Got it. Those three. Constables for the Board of Selectmen.
Yes, please.
Then there's the next issue. Should the charter include, or should the commission review the issue of qualifications and job descriptions in the charter? Should the charter incorporate a best practices standard and relegate the qualification to the director of personnel or human resources for approval in the form of an ordinance? Again, I mean, there could be, you don't really have, what we don't have in here, and it's probably late in the game. I mean, I'm sure I can give you language that would require department heads to meet certain qualifications, but right now, I would never advise you to lay out, with the exception of the CAO that we're just dealing with, I probably would not tell you to start laying out job descriptions in a charter. I would say that you should go with a broad best practices standard, but I don't know what you want to do. So that's that issue. I'll leave it to you.
I think on that note, I think we want to remove one standard. There was one that was always the example that was used about like the public works.
The engineer?
Yeah.
Department of Public Works engineer.
Yeah, we'll get to that. We'll get to that.
All right. John.
That is specifically laid out here.
Why does it hurt us just to have a best practices provision in the charter? Not to have specific qualifications of a specific
Oh, I don't
person.
disagree with that. Yeah, no, that's.
Yeah, I think that should be in there.
I can give you language.
Okay.
Give me a second. All right, the next question. How much detail? Should departments be delineated? Oh, this is a Steve Mednick issue. In the charter or mandated in the charter and shifted to ordinances. I think I've told you my philosophy on this. I don't think I raised it. I think somebody else actually raised it. My general philosophy is to try to move everything out of the charter into the ordinances. If you have departments and commissions that you think are required and mandatory, right now we're talking about departments, we're not talking about commissions, then you can delineate them and say there shall be this type of commission or that kind of commission. But generally, I think there's some departments you want to have a police department, you want to have a fire department, you want to have certain departments delineated. But in general, I have favored, and not most of my clients haven't gone radical on this one, but some of them have thinned down the documents to say there shall be departments that address human resources issues in the community, health issues in the community, whatever it may be. I'm not sure we're at a place where you can do that at this stage in any comfortable way. But I wanted to just give you, by way of background, my general philosophy is to move things to the ordinances so that the first select person, the Board of Finance, and the RTM can populate things in real time. So that if there's a need for something, they can be elastic and not be constricted by the charter. But I haven't gotten the impression that there are constrictions at this point. So assuming, unless somebody disagrees completely, I don't think we want to move in that direction. Correct? All right.
Yeah.
Jim Baldwin and I talked about this earlier, or we talked about it briefly when we were going through the issues. Do we want in the charter to distinguish between those department heads that are classified and those that are unclassified? That are classified / union positions. I don't know if Jim has any thoughts on this. Is there any value in making it clear that where there's a position that is a classified position, we should just state it in the charter so that everybody understands that? And if so, Jim and I are planning on getting together. That could be one of the issues we look at. Any thoughts? John does this work professionally, so he may have his thoughts
Yeah,
on
his
it.
hand is up, so, or was up.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea to put it in there. And the other thing, Steve, just it's kind of related. The appointments made by the first select person. I know our current charter, it's listed, and then there's a line that says term, and then on a lot of them it's blank. And my concern is, I mean, it being a public sector employees, someone could make the argument that if any first select person, puts in a director of public works, for example, there's no term, I don't think, under that one. That individual could make an argument that he or she's in that job and can only be removed for cause. And I'm not sure that, maybe that's what we want, but I don't think so. I know Mr. Attorney Baldwin says the charter doesn't provide for that scenario, but I think it's still very unclear, and I think we need to just clarify that in the body of the document itself. So the first select person appoints these important departments. The question is, how long do they serve?
Some of them are inconsistent.
Some of them are CBAs, right?
Yeah,
some are
but also some have charter terms, like the building official is a 4-year term. And I don't know if the building official...
Some don't, though. Some have no terms.
Some of them have no terms.
How do we deal?
And the charter is silent on serving at the pleasure.
Right.
And on the term, it's very inconsistent. Maybe what Jim and I should do is, when we meet, we should go through and figure this out and see who is what.
Right.
And see whether it makes sense to establish terms. Some towns have terms for department heads. New Haven has fixed terms for department heads. Even those that are unclassified. Most of them are unclassified. The ones that are collectively bargained. Although I have to tell you, in the Corp Counsel's office, the lawyers have 1-year terms. And the city has been very careful in not giving up their right to the 1-year term. They have all sorts of other rights with regard to bargaining, but the city never gave up on the 1-year term. So everybody, as an attorney in the city attorney's office or the corporation counsel's office, is subject to reappointment every year. Just like lawyers in the private sector, we're not always going to be lucky enough to have the same clients. So, but with all other respects, they are covered by collective bargaining agreements. So maybe Jim and I will take a look at this issue, and then I'll have a better sense of how each of the departments work and whether it makes sense to have terms for some of them.
You know, maybe I'll throw this out there when you're looking at it, maybe the terms are commensurate with the term of the first select person, whoever that is, and those positions that don't have a listed term. And, you know, that way you get someone who maybe want to take the job, knowing they'll be there for 4 years. Obviously, they can be removed for cause if they're not doing a good job, but that's just my thought process there.
Okay. And then somebody wanted, it's a good segue, somebody wanted to address the for cause standard. You know, and I imagine that, why don't maybe Jim and I should just sit down and go through and see who's on the list, who serves at the pleasure, who's there for a term, and who is there for cause, who is there subject to.
And
The next issue.
Oh, never mind. Let's move on. Yeah, I've done some research on this, so I'll come prepared to that meeting, Steve.
All right, good. Yeah, let's.
Can I just make one comment?
I also need to meet with the town clerk, so we need to set up those meetings ASAP so we can get this one done.
Can I just make one comment?
Yes,
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have a private sector background, so it probably doesn't apply, but I guess I'd be a little bit concerned about making a lot of terms coterminous with the CEO, because then it makes positions that are now, I think in our town, not considered political positions, most of the department heads, could make them sort of political. Like the new person comes in and you wipe out the old team, bring a new one. We've not had that historically, I think mostly to our benefit. So in all this, I'd just be careful with that too.
That's a good point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, John.
And hey, Chris, I agree with that. We've had, I mean, we had a director of public works here for 30-something years.
Right.
And I think the reason why, not only did that person do a great job, but the other reason why is the charter was silent on a term. In other words, that person couldn't be removed but for cause. So you got to look at it from both sides.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's hard. Yeah.
And I think the way it works in many communities is it's a 4-year term. You're not going to attract top talent.
Right.
And the concept of having a term for department officials is to be able to get the best talent you can get for the rates of pay that municipalities pay. And if you see that the mayor is a 2-year term mayor and you're serving coterminous with the mayor, who's going to come from Topeka to New Haven or Fairfield for a 2-year term if they're lucky? So I think the terms, if you have a term, should probably be for a prospective term when you bring somebody into the job. Makes sense. The next issue, there were a few issues, and Jim could hold his ear when we raise these issues. Some people raised questions about the town attorney and the way it's appointed. Currently serves at the pleasure of the mayor. I don't think there's any big changes in here. Need language that the town attorney has authority to retain attorneys to provide legal services when necessary that can be not handled by the town attorney, subject to the appropriations made by the town bodies. I'm assuming that's what he does right now. I'll stand corrected, but this is just the comment that was on the grid. So I don't think is there any reason anybody wants to make any changes here? We just move on. All right.
I don't. Let's move on.
Then there was the issue of the assistant town attorney. I think at the time, there are no assistant town attorneys right now. And so the question is, do you want to codify the current situation or leave it discretionary to the Board of Selectmen and to the RTM on the number of assistance that would be necessary. Leave it up to the town attorney through the budget process with the first select person to decide whether they want to go with the model that currently exists, which is their privilege, or with a model where there's a fixed department. In effect, and I'll defer to Jim on that, but I think that's the split, is do you eliminate the concept of allowing for the hiring of assistants and the creation of a fixed department, although this doesn't mandate a fixed department, or do you stick with the model where you have a town attorney who has maximum flexibility to bring in the attorneys that he or she believes are necessary to meet the objectives of the town? So I don't know what people's thoughts are on that. Yeah, and maybe the town attorney wants to put in a word.
Yeah, this is Jim Baldwin. I'll give you my 2 cents on this. My original thought was that the provision for assistant town attorneys was, again, kind of an archaic provision or language in the charter. But giving it more thought and thinking that flexibility is a good thing, I don't see any harm in keeping that in. So I would leave it as it is, because there's no harm done by doing so, and you just allow for that flexibility in the future.
Can I ask a question here? It doesn't seem to, 8.3A does not seem to square with 8.1. So officers appointed by the first selectman contains assistant town attorney, but then 8.3A reads, the Board of Selectmen, with the consent of the RTM, shall determine
Yeah, that's interesting. I have it put under a first selectman's appointment. I don't know why that would not be a first selectwoman's appointment.
maybe that was something that was changed when we were gonna make the RTM a legislative body. Was that?
I didn't change this. To the best of my
Otherwise, it doesn't
recollection.
make sense to me then.
Let me take a look. Current language. Selectmen with the, yeah, right now. I mean, I don't understand what the history on that is. Maybe Jim knows.
Well,
How the Board of Selectmen, with the consent of the RTM, shall determine the number of assistant town attorneys.
The last sentence of that subsection 9.4A says the first selectman may then appoint the assistant town attorneys and may remove assistant town attorneys without cause. So
she has the appointment authority. They determine what the number is. That's an odd provision.
It is.
And like I said, it hasn't been followed for a decade or more, but I don't see the harm in it, and it allows for flexibility. But I'm open to any suggestions to clean it up. But right now, in essence, the assistant town attorneys are also appointed by the first select person. However, it must be done with the consent of the Board of Selectmen and approval by the RTM. And none of that bothers me, quite frankly.
Oh, okay. All right. Well then.
Right now they are approved by the RTM, Jim?
With the consent of the RTM.
The
That's
position
for the
itself.
issue of determining the number, not the appointment.
Oh, that's correct. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah. That's right.
So the question is,
if the first
is there a rationale for leaving that the way it is?
Because
why isn't it just a budget? Why isn't it just a budgetary? Obviously, the new administration has made a determination to work on a model that you have, but this would allow the Board of Selectmen to, by 2 votes against the current first selectwoman, to decide we want to have assistant town attorneys, and then they go to the RTM and they approve them. They approve the positions. Why wouldn't this just be a budgetary decision by the first select woman? or is it not worth the battle? That's all.
I don't think it's worth the battle, and it is a budgetary consideration because there's no separate line item in the legal budget. It's just one number, and that would obviously be included. So,
all right, so we'll leave as is, unless there's objection. I'm sorry.
Well, it doesn't make sense to me, but that's fine. No one cares.
Okay. So the next issue is just
Can
below.
you put that in the list of our letter to the commission for 10 years from now?
Yeah,
We're
I'll
keeping
do that.
running tab of that.
There you go.
Dear 2030 commission.
The 2030 commission. The next issue is the fiscal officer and controller. And the note here is this provision contains a lot of detail work assigned specifically and solely to the CFO. There should be a provision to allow the CFO to assign other staff to these tasks, similar to the way the charter allows the controller to countersign requisitions, review the qualification provision, refer to best practices. I don't know where that came from, but that's the issue. Does anybody who works with us day to day see these issues? I assume they're talking about the provisions of B1 through 4. I don't know. Does anybody have any insights?
John told me.
I mean, just dealing with the finance director, I think he's got a staff that helps him do a lot of things. So I don't think this is really an issue.
Okay. Everybody okay with that?
Wait, okay with what? Are we deleting something? I missed this.
No. We're just not going to address it.
Okay.
It's note number 5, number 5, next to 8.4.
Where are these
Comment
notes?
number 5.
Oh.
We're leaving it alone.
We're leaving it alone.
Yeah. All right, perfect.
All right. Town treasurer, what do we want to do about the town treasurer?
Leave it alone.
Leave it alone. Everybody?
Wants to, what was that? Get rid of it or leave it
Well,
alone?
I'll be honest with you. I originally, I wanted to get rid of it too. I was going to get rid of it too because it's ceremonial. It doesn't do anything. But you know what? What if at some point we decide we want a treasurer, and they want to hire somebody in the accounting department to be the treasurer? What if in the future they decide they want that?
Somebody has to do the treasurer's functions statutorily. Anyhow. So,
Well, the
Yeah.
fiscal officer can.
The fiscal officer's doing it now, but what if they decide they want to break that out? I don't know. It leaves flexibility.
Chris Brogan has.
Yeah, I think it's a waste. I talked to one of the former town treasurers today who I think was pretty diligent about it, and she said, sure, get rid of it. You don't do anything. And as you said, it was delegated to the CFO. So, I mean, I suppose, having said that, doesn't matter, but you do get some people in there who really aren't necessarily qualified either. So what are they doing there? And I think if you give the role to the CFO, that always implies that within the office, she or he can have somebody to functionally do that role. It becomes important enough. The CFO's name may need to be on things. So I don't think it's a big deal, but I would have objection, get rid of it.
I would second John Wynn here. I would second getting rid of it just in the interest of streamlining it, as long as we vest the responsibilities for the treasurer activity with the CFO.
I don't understand the whole workings of it too. Like, I feel like this would be one of those, like, what happens if you press this button thing? I gotta. So I'm like,
We go bankrupt.
you know, what is it? Maybe it's ceremonial, but there could be some reason for it, and it's not costing us any money. It's not like kind of no harm, no foul in my eyes here. So,
can I tell you something? We just did this in Middletown last year. They had an elected, he's still in office, till the end of office. He will not be eligible to run for re-election because there won't be anything to run for. So they've eliminated the position there, and I don't think they thought there was any harm as long as somebody assumes the responsibility of treasurer. And they did throw somebody out who was an elected official, so there was a political, minor political brouhaha, but it made no difference in the end with regard to the charter revision. You can leave it, love it or leave it. You can decide what you want to do. But what I'm saying is the little city of Middletown just got rid of theirs, and I don't think there's any implication with it. So it's your call.
I'll heed to the majority of the commission what people want to do.
Well, and also, if we do take it out, if for some reason it turns out, wow, we need it, there's nothing prohibiting the RTM from creating a position, correct?
You could ultimately create it, and you can make sure that the functions, I would move the functions to the fiscal officer.
Right. But if for some reason, as we said, oh no, you really do need a separate one, that can be handled. We don't have to wait for the next charter revision.
No. They can
Let me
create it by
talk,
ordinance.
if I can just ask the indulgence, let me talk to the actual treasurer who's doing it now, and if I can get some more detail on that, maybe we could revisit this on Thursday.
I'll sit tight.
That. Okay.
All right. So table. Okay.
Now the public works. This is
No issue with building official. Yep. Well, we're not there yet.
Yeah, next is public.
Director of Parks and Recreation.
No, we
Oh, here's Public Works. I'm sorry. You're right. Okay, sorry. What's the issue here? Retain the qualification. So let's see.
Oh.
I think it's the professional
Engineer.
Oh yeah, the the engineer.
I think there was a thought that it may limit our ability to hire people because it's a professional engineer requirement. And we do have a professional engineer working for the town already. I think we have two, don't we?
Yeah, we have more, I think.
So
we have three. I know Laura Pulley, 3 or 4. They added more. Brenda did a reorganization. I think we should get rid of this. I've spoken with someone who's actually an engineer, and he says it's antiquated. This is like a throwback to when Department of Public Works didn't have engineering departments. He's like, you don't need this anymore. And he has that qualification. He's like, you don't need that.
My understanding is it's more of a managerial position, or so that you want to be able to have some flexibility there. So we've heard a lot about this. So I would propose we get rid of the professional engineer requirement in A.
I agree.
Is Public Works over engineering? Does engineering report to Public Works?
I think so.
Right?
I think so also.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. Yes, they are.
Yes. Okay.
The next issue is 8.10. There's a question. Does the Director of Parks and Recreation conflict with the Department of Public Works? And then my question is, if so, what can we do about it?
Exactly what's that?
Oh.
They did.
Does anybody have any ideas on this issue, why this issue would have arisen?
I think I brought it up.
Did you since then they've separated out though, right?
Right. So here's my question. The Parks Department has now moved under the Recreation Department.
Correct.
And if you this has now become confusing because number 8 said, coordinate the maintenance of parks and recreation facilities with the Department of Public Works, which shall supervise all maintenance and construction. So that's now all moved under the Park and Rec Department as parks. So I think that needs to get cleaned up, which then reverts back to 10.8 Department of Public Works C, which is the maintenance, care, and improvement of and construction work required in connection with public cemeteries, parks, playgrounds, beaches, marina facilities, and recreation area of the town, as requested by the Selectmen, Parks and Rec Commission, Conservation Commission, BOE, and or other bodies. It says nothing about the Director of Parks and Rec, so somebody needs to clean this up.
Yeah.
Maybe we should talk to Anthony and
Yeah, maybe Anthony and Bucky and, you know,
John.
John
Yeah.
can
Who's gonna do
look at that.
Is that Marlene and Pam are gonna do that, or does Steve have to be involved in that conversation?
Well, if you want, I can follow up with the first select woman and find out what the departments are recommending to clean that language up. Would that be helpful?
If you don't mind, if you could find out what that is, I don't want to just make something up. We should find out how the departments feel they can coordinate better under the charter and what language you work.
All right, this is good. We started on this because we can have some homework and get that done by Thursday. So.
Oh, thanks. Thank you.
You have an RTM meeting at 8, right?
I do. I unfortunately have a hard stop at 8.
Yeah, I think that's when we're going to stop. But yeah.
You guys probably want to eat dinner anyway. I'm going to go to 11.
Well, that's good to know. All right, so 8 o'clock, we're done. The next is tax collector. And 8.15, and it was the 2 sections dealing with counting method and special exemption. And I can't pretend to know what this issue is all about. It's just reference to those sections. Why are we, and maybe Jim Baldwin could help me with this, why are we mandating a particular system of accounting for keeping records approved by the State Commissioner of Revenue Services, that the tax collector shall not be required to post collection of taxes or assessments in the tax book or tax rate books? Where is this language? This is all language that goes back to the special acts, and there was an amendment, but is there any history on this? And then the special exemption, subject to continued approval of State Department Commissioner of Revenue Services. This charter shall not be applicable to the town or section 9-17. This section shall not be applicable. I'm not sure what these sections are all about. Should I talk to the tax collector, Jim? Is that?
I think that's a good idea, Steve. This is Jim. Or I will, if you want me to have some homework as well. Whatever.
Do you mind?
No, I'll take care of that.
All right. Because I can't even tell you what those issues are all about, frankly. The tree warden. There's a 1-year term for the tree warden.
Steve, there is there is a highlight of above under Director of Parks and Recreation for section point 11.b. I don't know if that was anything, but it was highlighted.
Which section?
Under Parks and Director of Parks and Recreation,
8.10.
10. Right under 11. If the Golf Commission or Harbor Management Commission.
All that is an internal reference.
Oh, okay. I just didn't know.
I mark the internal references, so when I'm doing final drafts, I'll figure out what section goes in there. Thank you, though, Merlin. So I guess with the tree warden, the question is the 1-year term. Somebody raised that issue.
Does it have to be 1 year, or can it be more than 1 year?
I think that was the question.
The charter says 1 year, so there's no.
Right.
I don't think there's any.
Is there a statute that says it has to be 1 year? Can we get rid of the 1 year? Like, why does this poor guy have to keep, or woman have to keep getting reappointed every year?
This is Attorney Baldwin again. It is a statutory requirement.
It is statutory?
Oh, okay.
I'll confirm that, but I'm 95% certain that's why it's there.
I
Yeah,
was
but
not
the
Okay.
aware of that.
statute says 2 years.
Yeah.
It's
58?
23-58.
Yeah,
Oh, you just looked it up, Brian?
it did. Um,
Well, can we
That's-
change it to 2 then?
2
I would say in
years
accordance
until
with the
their
state
successors
statutes.
are appointed. Oh, and they get deputy tree wardens too, by the way.
We just have a tree warden, right?
Yeah.
So can that be 2 years?
Well, we can say in accordance with the statutes, so we don't.
Yeah.
Shall be appointed for a term of 2 years until their successors are appointed and qualified, which means they could be there for 40 years. But it's 2 years.
Well, I think we should definitely change that. I think it's kind of silly to bring somebody in and make them keep repeating themselves.
Should we simply say in accordance with state statute as opposed to the time frame? Because if the statute changes,
That makes sense.
and I can do a note, okay, in accord with statute, and I'll make a note at the bottom, a footnote, that at the time of the adoption of the charter, it's 2-year term.
Okay, that'd be good.
Gotcha. Tree warden.
All right. Can we jump around? Oh wait. So the police chief of police is next, right?
Health is next.
Health Department, Director of Health.
All right.
There is no licensed
Thank you.
physician requirement any longer, by the way, by state statute.
What was that, Steve? Can you repeat that?
I don't believe there's a licensed physician requirement. I'll double check that. I talked to the general counsel of the Department of Health yesterday.
Yeah, I looked at the statute. I read it. It had to be a doctor
Yeah.
who has public health, or somebody with a master's degree
Correct.
in public health.
So it's not an absolute requirement. It's an eligibility. It is something you could do, but it's not. It should not be your sole. I mean, I guess it says a physician or otherwise shall possess the qualifications set forth. It's not a locked-in requirement. So
The way it reads, yeah, I either refer to the statute or say the whole thing. Now it almost
I would
seems
simply
to
say
imply-
shall.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say shall be qualified in accordance with the statutes, as opposed to locking anything in here.
Okay.
Okay.
Shall possess the qualifications set forth in. Is that all right?
Yes.
Sounds good to me.
Steve, this is Jim again. I think for people who are going to read this charter again, having that footnote like you suggested in the previous example with the tree warden, having a footnote like you did there, to put one here so that
Well, absolutely, yeah.
it gives some guidance to those who read
Absolutely.
the document.
Yep. The way I note them, I don't know if I've done them yet in our charter, but you haven't seen any of it, is I have what I call 2022 Charter Revision Commission commentary. And it will say that at the time that we adopted the charter, bop, 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 bop. So I'll make that reference in both the tree warden and in the health department, director of health. Do we want to, we have only 5 minutes left. Do we want to hold off on the police chief and fire chief to the next meeting?
I think the police chief, the only issue is residency, and I think we had consensus on that, right?
Oh, was there?
Wasn't the only issue, I don't even see it in here, wasn't it the residency issue?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's up
Could
to
have been
Brian.
an elector, but yeah.
The question though is, I think it was raised for the fire chief as well, if I'm not mistaken.
7.1A.
Yeah. The question is, do you want to eliminate it or do you want to create a waiver? That was the question I raised for you guys.
where is it again? 7.
It's right at the beginning.
7.1A, first page of this document.
I got you. Thank you.
Yeah, I should have raised it as the very first issue. I'm sorry, but I thought I'd raise it when we got to the police and fire department. Yeah, so the question I had, and that's my note here, is do you want to eliminate the requirement or do you want to allow for a waiver of the requirement?
I would say that in this day and age, I think that we would just say, and it just say must be, and then after that, strike everything and replace it with a resident of the state of Connecticut.
Is that
John,
the pleasure
I don't
of the body?
Matola. John Matola has his hand up. Are you agreeing or are you saying something?
No, I'm okay with that. The only thing I remember John Wynn mentioning this, I guess you have to be careful about it if you get rid of the residency requirement. They got to be within a geographical area where they can get to Fairfield quickly in an emergency. And is there language in other charters that have, you know, they don't have to live in the town, but they're within a 30-mile radius of where they work, or there's nothing like that then? Okay.
I've not seen anything like that. There's either a residency standard or not.
Okay.
I'd like to think that if whoever the appointing authority is would have an understanding with their police and fire chief that there's an expectation that if there's a fire in town, they'd show up.
Yeah, I don't think it would be illegal to put that
so.
in the job posting because it's reasonably related to the job. So.
Yeah, that's fine.
What did we say? I'm sorry.
I'm okay with what you said, Brian. I just want to make sure whoever their fire chief is or police chief is going to be close enough that they can get here. That's all. And I think you're right, Steve and Chris, that the commissions will be able to deal with that when they're looking to hire a police chief or fire chief.
You can put it as a condition of employment.
Yeah.
There still are a few things. So you want to stop there and we'll move on at the next meeting?
Yes.
Now let me ask this before we break, because I've got the first thing we're going to do is go over the things that we did tonight. And then it's boards and commissions at the next meeting. Well, let's see how far we're going to get. I'll try to do something for you on the Board of Education at least, because it'll take us a little while to go through what we did. And then what we need to do tomorrow at the next meeting on Thursday is think about the end game. I think we're probably going to need at least 2 more meetings after that, plus the public hearing. And I'll talk to Jim about sitting with the first select woman and figuring out the transmittal to the Board of Selectmen. That's really key to the end game. And you have not seen, because it doesn't exist, although after we get these chapters done, I will then have a pretty substantial jump on the charter. We'll have a charter, and we'll be able to look at it. But we'll finish up the work we did tonight, and then maybe I'll have Board of Education in there, and I'll see what I can do to get the boards and commission issues ready for you as well. And I think those are most of the substantive issues. And I think one of the big decisions you're going to have to make on the boards and commissions, we have a number of folks that have, well, actually the board and commission stuff is in here already.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Okay, so they're in here. I've done that already. But I guess the big questions are going to be some new bodies that want to come on and be in the charter. And that's what we have to decide what to do. And then I guess the other issue is whether with boards and commissions, unless you think it's gonna be a political problem, is whether we want to go back to that issue that I raised earlier about moving groups out of the charter and mandating them. So they're in the charter, they're mandated. We'd create a separate chapter for them or article for them. That would be a sunset chapter, and they would remain in the charter until the ordinance is adopted to replace them. And so I just wanted to give you some food for thought on that. I don't know if it's gonna be a big political brouhaha if you start moving people out wholesale, even if you keep them in a transitional section so they're not going away, and whether it's too late in the process to do that. But I just wanted to at least raise that possibility that I've done that before, where we just keep those boards and commissions that are critical in the charter, that are central to the operation of the community, of the government, versus those that are more policy oriented or issue oriented. So we can talk about that a little bit on Thursday. And that's all I've got.
Thursday is 7 p.m. And then the next one is May 12th that we have.
7 o'clock?
Are we 7?
Yep.
All right, guys.
Well, enjoy the first part of your week, everyone.
Good session, everybody.
Yes, thank you.
Good luck, Pam.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Bye.
You
Have
get to
fun,
go to
Pam.
another one.